Already starting.
Wolf King was here. I just recognized your voice. I just wanted to say hello. I really apologize. But anyway, sorry. Go.
And we're starting off with Suzuki DOS, everybody.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I screwed up his intro.
As soon as I clicked start, you're like, wait, before you start. I'm like, well, it's too late. It's rolling down here. All right, everybody. This is the Atheist Chef, Dinner with the Chef, countering creationist claims. Oh, now you're hitting some repeating, somebody.
I don't hear an echo. Maybe that's actually Epicurus, I think it was. Wait.
Oh,
no,
I'm sorry. I was typing in something.
Yeah, at the same time the noise was going on. Yeah. Okay. No.
And okay, is it now? We're done with the echoing.
Yep, we're all done with the echoing.
Well, because I'm still hearing it now.
Hey,
Oh
do
wait,
you
you know what? That could just be me being. Yep, that's my fault.
on YouTube.
It's because I was listening to myself on the other webpage, like I had it up. That's my fault. Anyways, so as I was saying before I rudely interrupted myself, we have gathered the greatest minds of all of that I could find in a short moment's notice, and we are talking about all sorts of creationist claims. I want to just start off. I'm just going to start off with Suzuki DOS. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. Talk about yourself and what is it you do for a living, and why are you qualified to be here today?
Well, I don't know if I'm technically qualified because I don't really want to put myself in any qualifications. Only thing that I did, when I was younger, I was inspired to be a Christian pastor. I went into Lutheran ministry and started to be a vicar, which I taught Sunday school and so forth. And those were the times when I started to realize there was a problem with a lot of answers I was trying to look for. And of course, there were many other factors which I don't want to get into. Then after that, I studied different religions, and then all of a sudden I realized I needed a job instead of doing this hippie thing going on, and eventually I got interested in biology and liked it. It was very hard as I went through it, but I realized how much I had a connection with it. And so I decided, I'm going to go and get my bachelor's degree. And then I got into the environment field kind of more as an accident, but I did it because I really wanted to, because I felt like I was wanting to make a difference, which I guess in some ways I have or not. And I've just been lucky. I guess what I'm really happy about is that I get to be around professionals in laboratories who actually do have doctorate degrees. And in the last 12 years or 13 or 14 years now, I kind of forget, I've just been lucky to have great information right in front of my hands when I need it, and great people who, when I need serious questions, can give me serious answers. So that's probably really my only qualifications, is that I have people outside of me who are professionals that can help me out in those things. And on top of that, I feel like for the years I've got to learn about biology, and it's always an ongoing process. I feel like the more I learn, the less I really know, even though that most people would say that I probably know than the majority that most people on a particular scale. But again, I come across some people who kick my butt in the process, so there you go.
All righty, thank you, Dan. Wolf King, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it you do for a living, and what's your focus? All right, give us the 411.
I was raised Southern Baptist. I never really questioned, the traditions that I followed up until my late teens, I suppose, when I watched Bill Maher's Religionists and research, and I kind of went on this progressive active free thought where I had to a Christian position to a deistic position, then an agnostic, then an atheist, then sort of on this free thinker like level. In regard to focus on evolutionary science, it's a rather academic, rather professional thing in that I learned the principles through anthropology and biology classes, and especially with in particular, I learned directly how to like the principles of DNA sequencing and how we actually use that to classify and group like organisms in terms of like how species diverge and the like. But and mainly my professional thing is really just like disseminating information. That's what I'm actually going to school for. Or I'm in basically that training to be a professional writer. Probably going rather informing people. And so it's sort of like in connection with what I do on YouTube. Religion, politics, science, pop culture, and that's pretty much it. And in regards to this, I like the real topic, like the fact that we're talking about like we understand it's not a matter of if, but rather how it occurred and evolution occurred, and what man in the sky that actually runs focusing on the merits of that idea. And I'm done.
All right, thank you. And boom.
Final thing, and Atheist Chef, thank you for letting me be on here. Thanks, man.
You're welcome. All right, boom, your turn. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it? What do you know? We got a new arrival, Fiona Robertson. Yay. Thank you for showing up. Let's see this, but we're going to continue, and I'll get to you in a second, Fiona. But for right now, boom, your turn.
Well, I don't have any fancy degrees, you know. That I never decided to go pay for it, but however, I did accumulate a lot, at least the fundamentals on the processes of understanding critical thinking throughout high school, not from high school, but throughout high school. But it did give me a great understanding of biology and how biology worked, how it came together, different terminology through the advanced biology courses I took in high school. Once out of high school, I quickly jumped onto the internet and basically watched huge amounts of data and videos and went to various websites, science websites, to read on papers and stuff like this. More recently, I've been studying on different formations of amino acids, different chemical compounds necessary for RNA formation, a lot of key ingredients needed for RNA formation, different properties of RNA once injected into different environments, a lot of primitive Earth conditions, and with these conditions, how we're able to actually form a lot of different chemicals that we didn't think we would, but the experiments have shown that they do form pretty easily, as well as the ability under natural conditions to form links between these chemicals and bonds between these chemicals.
All right, well, save the science for the creationists. This is just an intro. so appreciate you showing off how smart you are. But and so finally, are you an atheist, theist? You know, just so everybody knows.
I'm a Christian atheist, non-cognitivist. So there you go.
Well,
I'll put that. I'll spell it out here. Christian, atheist, atheist.
All right. Well, while we get that, let's see. Now, Joe Carter, you are next. Please just tell us about yourself a little bit, your position, and why you're here.
I am a writer, and I profess profound ignorance and passionate curiosity. I try to blend the two of those and just make a little bit of creep on nibbling at the edges of my ignorance with some reality. So I consider myself an atheist because I don't think we can know those deep things, but I think there's plenty of stuff right here and now that we can know and use to make the world a better place, and I think that's the top focus. So I do have a heavy interest in biology, so that's why I'm really interested in this topic.
Fantastic. And Epicurus, your turn. A little bit about yourself and why you're here.
What up, what up? My name is Epicurus A. Greek, which is not my real name if anyone would care to guess or even articulate in 2 seconds of just seeing the screen name, but I digress.
I was just going to call you Mustache Guy. So.
Oh, well, Mustache Guy's just fine. Basically, my background is non-biology, but it's mostly in the arts and humanities, but I'm here because apparently I heard it doesn't take a background in biology to oppose a creationist, so that works out just fine by me. I am a Christian, though. I'm Catholic. I don't think you need a young earth interpretation, and basically I think my background will still be helpful considering that they use a bit of biblical language here and there. I could kind of help parse that one out. Also, I have a background in philosophy, so I also know what they're trying to get at, and I've seen these arguments done before numerous times, and as I'm sure you guys all have. So that's basically my background and why I'm here.
All right, thank you. And finally, Fiona Robertson. Please just tell us a bit about yourself, your theological standpoints, and your work, and what is it you do?
Okay, I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm also a scientist. I have now retired.
Fiona, you're not coming through.
Yeah, you're very quiet. I'm gonna try and turn her up.
Is that any better?
Much better.
Yeah, I'm a Roman Catholic. I was a scientist. Retired now. Because I was scunnered with it. And the reason I'm here is because I am sick to the back teeth of hearing pseudoscience. And I got involved in all of this back in 2000, I think, because I just couldn't take the pseudoscience anymore. And I thought, I'm going to make a noise.
Can we get an amen, guys?
Yeah.
Amen. Just so you know, I just want to throw this in. There is a friend of mine who's actually he's evolutionary biologist and does I forget molecular biology, and he has a degree, and he's a Catholic too. So, anyways, done.
Yeah. Well, I did my first degree in applied biology. I did my master's in medical microbiology. I did my PhD in bacterial physiology. And then I did my postdoc work in gene expression in fish. That's all molecular biology.
See, and there you go, folks. You can be a believer and not be a creationist. Epicurus and Fiona are fantastic representations of that. And with that being said, we're going to start off. Everybody, I've given you guys the links to the talking points, but I'm going to copy and paste the first link for anybody that hasn't had the opportunity into the chat.
I also put it on the Google Plus chat, so if you go to Google Plus, you can see the chat that has all the entire thing. So in case anybody comes in later, they should be able to see.
All right, so there's only a few things that I had pointed out. So okay, so let everybody know that's watching this how this is going to work is we're going to talk about a main point from a person that gave me an entire list of links and arguments, and so what I'm going to do is essentially just review the link, review what was said. I'm going to give my piece, and then I'm going to let anybody that wants to step in the chance to step in. The very beginning will probably be a lot easier stuff, the real basic stuff that as J.D. Kane was saying earlier, having people like Fiona and Dan and Wolf King would probably just be complete overkill. We probably don't need this many brains to complete or to stand against a creationist argument. But toward the very end, where we're going to really go to get into the concepts of abiogenesis and proteins and all that kind of good fun stuff, where the smart people are really going to shine, is going to be at the end. So we're going to warm up everybody's brain with the basic stuff, and then we're going to get to the good, difficult things. So the very first thing that I wanted to talk about was actually this is probably a little more difficult. Actually, I'll probably say that toward the end. So let me go to the next one. The first law of thermodynamics defeats evolution.
First law?
Yeah.
Yeah, some people do make that claim. The second law is the most popular, but some people try and go there as well.
Yes.
So,
I think it's even on Answers in Genesis, worst arguments to use. It's been thoroughly debunked.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't stop them, does it?
No, I've even heard this in my biblical studies circles.
Yeah.
It has to be emphasized that it only works in a closed system.
That's the second law.
Oh, that's the second law? So first law of
The
thermodynamics.
first law is
First?
energy cannot be created or destroyed.
Ah, that one. One was
Actually, the first law of thermodynamics in a version of the laws of conservation of energy and adapted to thermodynamic systems. Actually, yeah, you're right. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
Yeah, it's just
that-
more by way of physics.
Yeah. Which then begs the question.
how was it created?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And when they say closed system, I mean, that's such a broad thing from where I stand, because you can have a closed system in a laboratory, you can have a closed system in a big warehouse working on something, then you can have a closed system just as when I go for soil samples, you can have it in certain areas where you go particular amount of depth to go grab something, and you can consider that a closed system. But you can also say the universe is somewhat of a closed system, maybe,
Well,
to a point.
I think the only, given our current understanding, the only truly isolated system, don't forget there's a difference between isolated and closed, the only truly isolated system, given our current understanding, is the universe. Energy
Exactly.
does not enter the universe, energy does not leave the universe. So that is the only truly isolated system. But we're into the second law here.
I see.
All right, and that pretty much covers the second law. We've covered now the first law and the second law. So
Well, one thing to say about the second law is that when you talk about the thermodynamically isolated system, you're talking about no matter or energy can enter or leave.
Yeah, and the Earth is an open system.
It is. Yeah. And the question that is always asked is, well, where is it getting its energy from? Well, see that big flaming yellow ball in the sky? That's where it's getting its energy from.
exactly.
And if you take a human being or an animal, you can basically make it a closed system by starving it.
Mm-hmm.
You can make it an isolated system if you starve it. And you get a brilliant demonstration of the second law of thermodynamics in action. If you starve yourself or an animal, it dies and turns into a little green runny puddle.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next one. There is not enough intermediate fossils. This is, of course, between, throughout history, throughout our evolutionary ancestry, there's not enough intermediate fossils.
Wow, I would have to disagree.
What the hell is not enough?
Bullshit.
No. What does it mean when they say not enough? Because that's such a vague terminology. Even if we had a complete series, they go, well, we don't have the babies from this baby and that baby from this baby. Yeah. And it's like, what the hell is not enough mean?
Every fossil is an intermediate anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, all life is in a constant state of transition. That's what the fossil record demonstrates.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also, just to point out something, I know you wanted to leave kinds right now, but since this section is making heavy use of the Hebrew word kinds, could I chime in with a bit of linguistic help?
Please.
Go for it.
Okay, the Hebrew word kinds comes, according to at least Strong's Concordance, and of course there's also English Concordance. There's a link on the Bible Hub. Basically, it means after which. Basically, kinds means translated from the Hebrew into the English. Not necessarily species, but more along the lines of, if you want to be broad or general about it, not necessarily species or genus, but more charitable. The most charitable you could be is family. So, in terms of the taxonomy, it's kind of family. For example, in the Hebrew taxonomic structure, bats are put in the same category as the rest of the birds, even though in contemporary taxonomic systems we put them under mammalians.
Yeah.
So if we want to be as broad and general as possible, families would probably be the best way to do it. And as long as biologists do have transitions between one species in one family to one species in another, that's basically all you need.
I think it's Ken Hamley with around about the family level as well, when he debated Bill Nye, which raised an interesting problem. Because if he only took either one pair or 7 individuals, depends on whether we're clean or unclean, of the hominid family, we have to assume that that was Noah and his brood. So where did all the other hominids come from?
Right.
Right.
Well, I think one of the nails that hit me was when I got to study about well evolution. I mean, they left such huge fossils behind, and there's a whole lot of them. I mean, we got Pachycetus. If you've seen those bones, and you go all the way down to was it Rhodocetus, and then you go down to Dorodon. I mean, we have some really good matching, and you can actually see how they became land animals to eventually getting into the water. And this is where we can still look at whales and dolphins and so forth, and we can link them back to taxonology and actually see how they work. And if people, I remember some hardcore creationist Christians who thought the world was 6,000 years old. When you take them to like Berkeley and show them this, they're actually a lot of times astonished to go, oh wow, now I see what you guys are talking about. And it does leave a lot of questions in their mind, and it sort of destroys their whole 6,000-year-old version of our planet. And I think well evolution has been just demonstrably been, to me, one of the great smoking guns for me. So
So I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Wolf.
Basically DNA transitional forms like not just what Suzuki mentioned, but also like Australopithecus africanus, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. Us sitting in this chat room right now. I mean, everything is in a constant state of transition, and in terms of the billions of years that life has existed on this planet. Meanwhile, there's a book that says that mentions like a particular tribe from the Middle East that believes that there was a particular entity that created 2 individuals out of dust and ribs. I mean, I'm just torn. Not really.
So, all right. So, what are the best methods that scientists can tell a common ancestry? Now, we can understand, their bone structure, but how many different things do scientists use to say, okay, this one is obviously an ancestor of the other?
Are you talking about different fields?
Just anything. I mean, from paleontology, biology, studying of DNA. I mean, why don't you just everybody that they can just give us the best, explanations to what each field says about how to prove a common ancestor. To put it that way.
Anybody want to take it? Go for it.
I believe phylogeny.
Well, one of the at least the one notable that you can actually test for now is that I can remember is virus encoding in the DNAs of certain species.
That's endogenous retroviruses.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And essentially, you can, if you go to, specific ones, is we have certain ones in our genes. I think baboons. Yeah, baboons have also the same type in their genes. And then you go out to further think chimpanzees, have them as well. But I think one more out, and I can't remember the relative out there, but that one more relative ends up not having one that we have. So they don't have that strand of that retrovirus in our DNA that the other one that we have. Yeah. So.
I think our closest relative is the bonobo chimp.
Yeah, bonobo is what I meant.
Yeah. The smoking gun for me is the gull O gene and the inheritance pattern of the surogene. I think that for me is definitely smoking gun. Excuse me, guys. Hold on a sec.
So we also have on top of that. Oh, he's back. Okay, go ahead. Can you go into a little bit greater detail about that, Fiona? I mean, give us a real layman's.
And I'm having a hard time hearing her, and I want to be able to hear what she has to say.
I have her loud as possible. So.
Okay.
I'm noticing I'm not getting green bars very well. Hold on. I'll check my settings because I've been having trouble with this. Right, is that any better? No.
Sounds fine. Go ahead. I'll do the best I can.
Yeah. Just mute
How's that?
and turn up the volume on your side, on our side. So just mute it and turn up your own volume.
Is that any better?
It's good. I can actually.
Yeah, I think you're good now.
Okay, the gull pseudogene. The gull gene encodes the final enzyme in vitamin C biosynthesis. And everybody knows that we can't make our own vitamin C. So, when you look at the gene in humans, it's it's broken. There's about half of it missing. And I think it's exons 1 through to 6 and exon 11. Plus it's also missing the promoter. Now, if you look at the other grey apes, in fact, if you look at the entire haplorhini crowd, all of them have that gull gene or pseudogene broken in exactly the same way. And there are over 100 species of haplorhini. So either this huge deletion has occurred in exactly the same way, independently, in over 100 species, or the common ancestor of the haplorhini suffered the deletion. Now, if you look at the other group of primates, the Strepsirrhini, they have a functioning gull gene. It functions perfectly. So somewhere after the split with the Strepsirrhini, the haplorhini suffered this deletion. Now, one of the arguments that have been put forward to explain this was that there's a mutational hotspot. Enter the guinea pig. The guinea pig also has a non-functioning gull pseudogene, but its gene has been broken in a completely different way. So it can't have been a mutational hotspot. And also, I think it's fruit bats and some passerine birds also are unable to make their own vitamin C. But this grouping of that type of mutation within the haplorhini shows that all the haplorhini must be related.
All right. That was
Did that
over
help?
my head. I'm so glad that somebody is smart enough to know that, because, I mean, I got it, but at the same time, I'm so glad you're there to do it. I mean,
may I attempt to reiterate that in some more basic terms, if I could? Just as I understand it, Fiona, you're far more knowledgeable than I am, so I may fumble over my words, but I want to make sure that anybody that's listening or watching actually captures the importance of what you said, and that is that that if we start chasing backwards in time genes, that we see the ability for a lot of different creatures to produce vitamin C somehow got deleted at some point in time, and that those that processed out of the multi branches that happened after that all have that deletion. They can't produce vitamin C. Is that a fair way of saying it? So that's one of the key evidences for the fact that we have common origin. That's just one example that you were pointing out was a really important one, and kind of indicative of a lot of things that are peppered throughout the genome across the planet that indicate that we do have common origin.
Yeah, okay. And the thing is, the point is that the explanation for it is either that it happened once in the common ancestor of all the haplorhini, which is why they all have the same version, or less likely that the exact same mutation happened in over 100 separate species independently of each other.
And when you're talking about that, you're not just talking about independently. You're talking about they had to be broken exactly the same way that we
Yes.
find in the genome and the gene code, and introduced in exactly the same way, and then under the same conditions, under the same coding. So yeah,
and
you're
that's the
talking about a
problem.
huge problem.
Well, and
Yeah.
my question on this is, and I've heard a similar argument, and basically a lot of creationists respond with the idea of horizontal gene transfer as opposed to vertical gene transfer. Is there, so can you give, what you would say to that kind of claim?
Oh.
Are we allowed to swear in this hangout?
Yes, go, Fiona, swear.
Well, let's put it this way. How could I horizontally obtain someone else's mutated gene?
You can't because it's a loaded question.
No, you can't because it's impossible. In species which sexually reproduce,
Yeah.
how could I, myself, gain a mutation from somebody else? I can't.
The actual terminology that's used is horizontal gene transfer only works on single cell organisms or a very small limited cell organisms that can either they connect with other organisms such as viruses, but you'll get a different result with every virus if they attach the sex cell, which is the retroviruses that we get. But they induce into a huge stream of genetics when you're talking about that.
The other thing is that for it to be passed on, even if you said, okay, you become infected with a virus, it integrates into your genome, your problem is that you are not going to pass it on unless that has happened in one of your sex cells as well. A mutation in the skin on my elbow is not passed on to my offspring.
So I want to make sure that I'm clear on this. So a horizontal gene transfer can only happen through either, like you said, through a single cell or like a very basic multi-cell organism.
Like mini prokaryotic cells that you kind of do some test labs in. Probably see that. So
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we just dealt with that this week. Good one is that is a constant one that you can watch is like a guy who's our top genetics. Been studying for years on tuberculosis and watching its change. Tuberculosis, if you actually look at old tuberculosis prokaryotic cells to the ones we're seeing now, it's gone through some massive transformation.
Oh yeah, I mean tuberculosis is one of those ones that because it was a slow disease, it got the opportunity to undergo loads of transformations, and I mean the prokaryotes are able to take up naked DNA from the environment.
Yeah.
And they're also able to transfer plasmids between each other. Plasmids
I do want to
circular
add
pieces.
something. Sorry. I was going to say, I do want to add something. Is how bacterium and viruses work within people. They do bond a little bit with our DNA when they're making themselves, replicating themselves. But that's the
Not
bacterium
bacteria.
itself.
Not bacteria.
Like HIV will bond with our DNA, become inactive, and then force the replication much later.
Yeah, but I mean that's specific to the retroviruses.
Yeah, and that spreads the retroviruses, but does not affect. Well, it affects people, but it does not bond with our DNA and form baby DNAs with it.
Yeah, it tends to splice into the chromosome at a certain point. But your problem there is that unless that change occurs in a sex cell, that is not going to be passed on. Now, I'm not talking about the disease. I'm talking about the virus in that particular position in the chromosome.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter what happens to any of the cells in your body. If the sex cells are not affected, you will not pass it on.
That's comforting to know. I will not lose sleep tonight about passing on something with horizontal gene transfer. So let's move on. I believe we've covered that out pretty well. The next question was about evolutionists are purely uniformitarian and not catastrophists, or do not believe in catastrophism.
Wait, what?
Could I tackle that one a bit, just to expound on it?
Sure.
Yeah, because I don't even understand that question. I guess I haven't looked up those words, so you may have to fill me in.
Actually, it has a very rich history in 18th century geology, of all things. You see, there were two main kind of schools with regards to the past of the Earth. There was the uniformitarians and the catastrophists, or the catastrophitarians. Basically, the catastrophitarians believe that the past of the Earth went through periods where there was pure catastrophe, just messing up everything, geology, environments, things of that nature. And it was far more destructive than any regulatory patterns because some supernatural entity was interfering. So usually religious reasons backed up the catastrophitarians. While the uniformitarians just believe the past was uniform. It never changed. Patterns just reoccur in nature over and over again, unless you factor in certain things relegated to the period, but that's based on the geological evidence itself. So basically, the catastrophitarians went away because their explanation could not account for anything, and the uniformitarians just basically stayed and lingered on. And because we have uniformitarians, basically geology was able to succeed in describing periods of time in the past wherein events were happening, and how that would have affected maybe the layer of the sediment. Is that the correct term? Geology is not my expertise, so I'm just remembering this from my history class. But that's the main difference here.
Right.
Yeah.
So the important thing that needs to be noted is that though uniformitarianism used to have an origin of just straight up, that was the only possibility, is that the universe, or the Earth rather, has always stayed, or really slow gradual progression, and everything we know is from that. But that's not necessarily true. They accept there were catastrophic events do occur, but for the most part, everything is pretty much uniform, and slow gradual changes do occur.
I will have to say about the uniformitarianism on that part, boy, if that was the case, it sure would make my job easier. So I would have to rule that whole thing out because my job's not easy based on that, and we just had a class example of that because there's a place where there's some water that got contaminated. We had to do soil samples, water samples, air samples. We had to do the whole sample. And then on top of that, people were saying we're getting cancer. Well, we had to go through who was having cancer, what kind of cancer were they having? Was it passed on? Was it something that just happened through a made-up tumor? And matter of fact, what happened was all these people were making claims. We had to rule out about 90% of them so far, and we still haven't solved the problem because we're still trying to narrow down to what's going on and are they being contaminated by this water. So if uniformitarianism was there, it would sure X out a lot of stuff and make us get quicker to the point, but it's not there. So I can roll that one out.
And this would be like a pure uniformitarianism that they're kind of espousing on you guys. Although the kind of catastrophe that they would want is something akin to a flood that swept the whole globe. So that's kind of what they're pushing by saying you just go about not assuming a flood happened. Although I'm pretty sure you guys, if a global flood did happen, would have the tools to figure that out. Would you not?
Well, yeah. I mean, we've had global events before. Look at the KT event. It's been renamed. I can't remember what it's called now. But I mean, that was global, and you find that thin iridium layer all around the globe. But I think uniformitarianism is better described as that things happen with a uniformity and a predictable sequence of events unless something very unusual happens. Rather than something unusual just happening, like the flood. Because we look at the eruption of Toba. That almost made us go extinct. Because it it was a global. It had a global effect. And was it Tambora as well? That also had a global effect, but not quite as bad. So you've got, and I think really what the argument is about now, it's not so much about uniformitarianism says that nothing unusual happens, because that's patently nonsense. What it is that the uniformitarians are claiming a uniform speed of light, a uniform effect of gravity, whereas the creationists are saying, oh, light used to be so much faster. Or they say, how do you know gravity was the same all those years ago?
Yeah, you don't know the atmosphere of the pre-Earth flood, or pre-flood Earth, rather.
Yeah, but the thing is,
that's not a term used actually. That's what's funny. That doesn't exist as a scientific term.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's what we're saying now is that the speed of light is constant, and as far as we are aware, it always has been. They want to make it different.
Yeah, the thing is that the way in which you tell that the speed of light is constant is that if you have an emergence of variation in the speed of light as well as radioactivity, you have a shift in the amount of energy released. Therefore, the amount of radioactivity in the universe would be much, much higher. So you have a higher amount of energy we could actually measure, and we'd be able to measure that difference. In when we do the analysis of the universe, we'd be able to measure radioactivity caused by light photons.
Yeah, there's an example on Earth, the Oklo reactor. It's a natural nuclear reactor. It's got uranium deposits, and there was enough in close proximity to actually set off the little chain reaction that you get in a nuclear power station. Okay? Now, if you look at the basic equation, E equals mc squared, so the energy that you'll get from it is the mass times the speed of light squared. If the speed of light had been so much faster in the past, the Oklo reactor would have gone critical. It wouldn't still be there.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter like what direction you're going or who's doing the measurement. The speed of light is the same.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how a person moves relative to you, light travels at the same speed.
Yeah, but what they're saying is in the past it was a different speed.
That's bullshit though.
Oh yeah. But do you know what evidence that they use for the speed of light slowing down? They look at the measurements that have been made since 1814, and we've been using finer and finer measurement techniques, and we're getting better accuracy. And it just so happens that of all the measurements, you can find 9 that you can plot that make a straight line with a decent regression coefficient showing a line sloping down to the right. And they say, oh, there you go, the speed of light is slowing down. What they're forgetting is, 1, it's to do with better measuring techniques, and 2, they had to ignore the other 160 odd measurements to get 9 in a straight line. That's what you call cherry picking your data.
Yeah, and that's nothing new. So let's move on to other cherry pick things, such as radiometric dating. That is inaccurate, etc., etc. They can come up with examples of times where radiometric dating has been wrong. Which, of course, the obvious thing to say is, yeah, and scientists admit there are certain examples in which radiometric dating has been wrong, but they can explain exactly why.
Yes.
And they've also, now, and radiometric dating is not even the most accurate thing now, or the most used thing now. Now scientists are depending a lot on isochronic dating, which gets away from the radiometric dating problems that creationists like to pull up. So who would like to go on from there?
Can I please mention this one? Please.
Yes.
You go ahead, Fiona. You tear these creationists a new one. Let's go.
Right. Steve Austin. Heard of him?
Oh, I've heard of him.
Yeah. He took a sample from the new dome at Mount St Helens. It was something like 10 years old. And he sent it off for potassium-argon dating to a laboratory whose front page of their website said they could not date anything that was less than 2 million years old. His was 10 years old. So straight away you can predict that he's going to get nonsense out of this. And sure enough, he got nonsense. Whereupon he screamed from the rooftops, "Look, this doesn't work." He didn't tell the laboratory that his samples were only 10 years old, because if he had, he would have refused to process them. The other thing was that potassium-argon dating it relies on how long rock has been solid for, because argon as a gas, it bubbles out of molten rock. So when the rock solidifies, it's argonless. It's all gone. But once it's solid, any argon is trapped. Now, one of the isotopes that's present is potassium-40. And potassium-40 decays to argon-40.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
So the argon that is produced from that decay process within the rock is trapped, and it builds up slowly because the half-life is something ridiculous, billions of years. So you really got to have quite an age before you get a decent amount of argon that you can measure accurately. Otherwise, it's like measuring the width of a human hair with a yardstick. And if you measure a sample that is far too young, the amount of argon is so minuscule that you can even end up detecting background argon from the previous sample that's been put through the mass spec. And that's why they say under 2 million years we don't want to know, because there just isn't enough there to detect with any accuracy. But of course, Steve Austin, knowing all of this, deliberately misled the laboratory. On top of that, his sample also contained olivine. It hadn't been cleaned properly. And olivine remains solid and a crystal at great temperature and depth. So there was already solid in his sample that was be old olivine as a solid being erupted into the new dome. And that was much older when it solidified, because it solidified way, way deep at very high temperatures. So it had been solid for a long, long time.
And not only that, you got to realize that even the carbon dating, like at this one lab, the machines are getting better through time, and I love when they get these things. So, oh, we have a bad data from particular things. And I'm like, okay, what are they using right now? And I always notice they start using a lot of equipment that they go to that, in a lot of ways, it's kind of out of date, and it's not up to the newer technology. Like, I don't do this anymore, but when we had to go out and do go look for particular companies who wanted to go look for coal, we had to actually drill down and figure out not only the density, but uranium dating was a big part of that. And I always crack up when these creationists tell me, oh, well, there's all these coal companies and all that are, hardcore evangelical Christians that believe in young earth. Yeah, I've run across these people, and I love when they want data from us to know where they're going to get their coal, and they want to know how old and what kind of data we give them, because if that data doesn't match up to a certain particular amount of numbers, it's useless. They can't go around wasting money digging down and trying to get that particular coal so they can burn it. So they rely on it, and it's funny how many of these corporations who give money to these young Earth creationists, or I should say these angelical Christian churches who are so dogmatic against evolution, they're the biggest supporter of knowing that the Earth is extremely old, and they want the data from us. So that's where I crack up. I can't figure out, like, why are these people who are creationists asking the right questions? Why are they not getting into a laboratory, and why don't they go through the process of seeing how these things work? You know, like I do, and I always tell people that I've had before, I'd say, come on in, I'll talk to them, and I'm more than happy for you to come in the lab and let you talk to these experts, and they'll walk you through the process. And I can never get takers on this, and especially when you're dealing with the carbon and uranium dating. If they just saw it and see how it works, they would change their tone.
I want to finish off there, and I just want to finish saying with that, saying, you know, radiometric dating has been, you know, it's been verified by use of isochron dating, and just basically every other type of dating that we have. They all fit so well with each other. They all independently verify each other. And just to cite off that, oh, there's a few times where, you know, these results have come up. You have examples kind of like Ms. Fiona over here just brought up, that it was intentional, or they discovered there are certain situations where radiometric dating does not work. Not every tool does every job. And to say that radiometric dating is, you know, just completely false from a few examples, just completely, it's just wrong. So let's just move on to...
Can I leave with this one last thing? In some certain situations, yes, it doesn't work. There are a lot of things that we do pull in, and we get wrong readings from another readings, but that's why we go through ample amount of testing to try to get down and make sure there's a consistency going on. So there is a difference there. So I notice they tend to pick out the ones where, oh, look, there's something wrong, and I'm like, yeah, but did you actually look at the stuff where it was tested? And where we had a consistent number going on where it actually supported that evidence. So anyways, I'm done.
All right, so the next is creationism actually allows you to make predictions. So creationists can make predictions, particularly using the Bible.
Did they make... wait, Atheist Chef, did they make a prediction of me face-palming at that claim?
I don't know. It's not in the Bible, so I don't know.
Yo, Chef, can I handle this climb?
Go for it.
Yeah, man.
Okay. I really think this is interesting. I was gonna bring this up in the last question, but I think this works just as well. Pat Robertson, he recognizes based on the demonstrable evidence, like with the dinosaurs and the radiometric and carbon dating methods, that this world is obviously older than 6,000 years. It's upon billions of years old. But you know, despite that, he still wants to like try and BS like language, like with the issue of a solar day, and like try to mold in the lineages of Adam, Abraham, Noah, and all this other BS, and try to say like this is somehow consistent. But the thing is, with regard to that, I mean, if you already recognize that you're living on an extremely old planet, it's kind of obvious that the principles of evolution are obviously going to apply to life and how it's going to become more complex and more diverse. I mean, that's just the way it works.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I'm struggling to think of any prediction that creationism has made, apart from mutations occurred because of the fall.
They predicted bottlenecking of species, which is funny because if you actually look at the graph that they try to use to demonstrate that it doesn't at all refer to what the hell they're talking about, and the actual time in which between the bottlenecking of those species, as well as there's actually a divergence of species, and you could see the actual divergent trail go this way, but the bottlenecking that they try to refer to happened such a long time ago, and has absolutely nothing to do with the flood event that they're referring to.
Yeah, I mean, the history of life...
Sorry.
I'm just gonna say this: the history of life can really be thought of as like a many branch tree. Where the organisms that actually like established in terms of groups were established early on. Bacteria, protists, amoeba-like creatures, fungi, plants, and animals. I mean, we as a humanity, we exist as a member species of this planet's biosphere, and the reason why we look the way we do amongst millions of different species is a result of the evolution of the physiochemical systems that make up our planet.
I'm just
You
curious.
know that through
If we
DNA
look
and
like,
fossils and stuff.
yeah, I'm just curious. If we look like dog people, or there were creationists that looked like dog people, and we saw those dog people, met those creationist dog people, would they be still proposing that there were no other intelligent beings that exist whatsoever except for them because God made them that special?
It's not.
One of the predictions that you can make from, let's say, the floodists is that given what we have got from archaeology, etc., you can predict that basically you should find evidence that the ancient Egyptians were very, very good at underwater pyramid building and underwater basket weaving and underwater firing of pottery. So far, we haven't found any underwater kilns.
And not only that, they should have like diving suits in order to survive long enough to have the processes
Exactly.
come to fruition.
So, I mean, all these people, when you look at the predictions that you should be able to make from this literal reading, you should be able to find evidence of underwater basket weaving because we have got artifacts that straddle the time of the flood. Now, all these Egyptians were all wandering about, happily building pyramids and firing pots and weaving baskets, while the entire world was underwater and everybody, including them, were dead. So it's not just this wonderful thing of having discovered underwater basket weaving, but it's underwater zombie basket weaving.
I've just been trying to figure out how the heck that in the pyramids, and especially when you speak friends who are really good at linguistics of different ancient, like Egypt and China. I mean, when these people are building things, I mean, how did they hold their breath for that long? I mean, these things were built, and not only that, they gave a lot of these people 100-year period between that, and that at least they gave a window place to say, okay, we don't know exactly when this pretend flood happened, but we'll give it 100 period, and every time we go across, we look at, especially Egypt did an excellent job leaving some of the best documentations that we have, and so did China. They're making things, they're building things, and their civilization that are alive. And here's the last thing that just kills me. I mean, how is it the next day, supposedly when the flood is over, that we have several millions of people in different parts of the world that are already living? I mean, excuse my language, if that's Noah and their sons having serious sex, that's a lot of pumping babies out. How many is that per minute on a day?
I know.
I'm sorry, they'd be dead. There's just no way you can do that.
I like how Sam Harris said that. He said God decided to flood the world right around the time the Sumerians were inventing glue.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, isn't there that wonderful meme? It was an article from The Onion. The Sumerians look on in confusion as God creates the earth. I like that one. But the other thing that, I don't know if any of you have heard this theory, but I say theory, I'm using it loosely. Did you know that when Noah was building his ark, they had helicopters, and they had factories pumping out the parts of the ark, and they also had casinos, strip clubs?
Yeah, that we call that the pillbox effect, because for some reason...
You guys are having it.
Hey, do you think kangaroos were there?
Wow, I gotta
The
send
symbol of Babel is a Stargate, apparently.
yeah. Sorry to take the attention off you, Fiona, but
No, it's okay.
I need to send Pillbox some aloe vera for that wicked burn.
The Sumerians.
The thing is, if you make an argument like that, there are casinos and strip joints and factories powered by electricity churning out the parts of the ark, then what else do you expect but ridicule?
You might as well, yeah, really. You might as well push your hair up and say aliens.
Yeah.
No, rock people. It's rock people.
Yeah.
No,
Rock.
Okay, get back a little bit. The one other thing about
Sorry,
the prediction
Neil.
that the website actually did say was that he was, because there was at a certain point where scientists believed, or possibly that where Neanderthals were our ancestors, and so he himself he was saying that he didn't accept that, and so because of the Bible. Because we couldn't have an ancestor like this, so therefore, Neanderthals couldn't be our ancestors. My point is, yeah, it was just turned out that you're correct. You made a prediction based on something that you didn't want to be true, and you just happened to be right. Think of how many things that creationists predict and have been completely wrong about.
Yeah.
So overall, if they're going to make predictions, you still have to resort to the scientific method. That's the only way you can accurately make predictions.
Yes.
Can I say something on that? And I'm glad that Wolfgang is here for this, because I got encountered with this a while ago. My one friend, he's a really good particle physicist, and he's African American or black, however you want to say it. And we got confronted by this black guy who's a Christian who came up and he told me, because I supported evolution, that I was a racist pig because basically I'm calling him an ape. And I was like kind of taken by that. Like, what? How did you even phantom that in the first place? And he said, well, wouldn't you be offended if you were considered to be an animal? And I said, no, not at all. I don't see where the problem is. And this is a big thing I have with a lot of these creationists. They seem to have a big problem, especially when you look at our eukaryotic cell. And you can look at a microscope and you can get an animal cell and a human cell, and you can't tell the difference. I mean,
but here's the interesting thing. Do you know what most theologians called humans for most of history?
I don't. No, tell me.
A rational animal.
Wow.
Yeah,
The funny.
that's actually a term borrowed from Aristotle, and it went into scholastic thought.
Yeah.
They thought that humans were a synthesis of a rationality and an animal kind of thing. So basically, unlike animals, humans could reason. We can think of abstract concepts of squares, shapes, and we could even comprehend universals. Like, for example, you could imagine a triangle, and it would be a particular one, like an isosceles or an equilateral. But we'd all have an understanding of triangularity as a universal. Animals wouldn't have this kind of notion. So they thought that's kind of like a divine aspect of us, whereas that we share with angels. But at the other side, we're like animals because we have, we're bones, we're flesh, we're fat, we shit. So we're kind of this nice synthesis right in the middle, which is a fairly interesting way of seeing it. So I don't really know where this notion of humans are just animals comes from, because for most of Christian history and philosophical history, that was the designated term for humans in a metaphysical sense, not necessarily in a biological one.
But this is a real problem, and I'll let you go. But this is a real problem. Like, there seems to be it's a downgrade to be considered to have. And even my friend, who's a theoretical physicist, African American, he just laughs at it. He just like, what's the big deal about? If somebody wants to say, yeah, I came from the ancestors that are ape-like, he says, I have no issue, but that's universal. It doesn't mean just because my skin is black and I'm white, we all come from the same thing. So what's the argument here? And I just see a lot of Christians like, how dare you call me an animal? That's such a horrible, evil thing to say. And I'm like, what the hell? Yeah. That seems like a serious psychological problem right now.
I mean, it's quite obvious from the fact that we look at it's a taxonomical misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't understand Carl Linnaeus.
If I could just like.
Yeah, I wanted to hear what Wolf had to say, and then please.
Oh, okay. Honestly, that sounds like a kind of humorous anecdote. Yeah, I often hear that, like, from people like people like G-Man and also like my own personal friends who like don't really get it. Well, just one in particular, but yeah, it's like this has been going on ever since Darwin like started off with the whole origin of species thing. Like most fundamentalists were for the most part, I ain't come from no monkey, but it's really not that. It's really a matter of recognizing how we through a matter of common descent. Recognizing how we happen to be related to other particular primates who meet that definition. We're Homo sapiens. We are a member species of the biosphere, and the reason we recognize how apes are the genes of you, me, and everyone in this room are made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical composition, and apes are our most closest relatives. And the way we recognize this is not just through classifications or transitional forms, but through DNA. It's a done deal. And and the main thing is the main thing we need to focus on as pro science people is education.
Yes.
Because for the most part, it's usually for the most part open-minded Christians who accept evolutionary theory over fundamentalists.
Well, if I may,
We're just well educated.
yeah, I'm trying to. All right, let me go. There we go.
Sorry, go ahead. It's Christian you.
All right. The thing is that when I talk to this one person who despised being referred to as an animal, and when I got an understanding for the reason why, that's the most important key. Why is it that they despise it? Well, how he sees it as a terms of behavior, and the way in which other animals happen to behave is the essentially the when they give that look like they're smelling shit under their nose. And I explained to the thing that's important to explain to them is that no matter how you behave, you are behaving as an animal because you are by definition one. So you can behave any way that you do currently, and you are still behaving as an animal. You're by definition are assuming animal behavior because you're a part of that classification. And that even if we are more sophisticated animals or more moral animals that try to benefit ourselves and others, we're still behaving in an animal way. We are just behaving in our own social and biological construction of our behavior, which is every species that ever existed on this planet does pretty much exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I always want to ask those creationists who say that we are not animals. Well, what would they rather have, animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Right.
Because that's their choices.
Yep.
But you do realise that there are creationists who argue that plants are not alive. Did you know that?
It doesn't surprise me, to be honest.
Exactly. So this is a huge stumbling block in trying to explain why man is an animal if they can't even understand that plants are living creatures, life forms, whatever. There you go.
Okay, great. So now we agree creation scientists can only make predictions using science. And if you try to use the Bible, you've been proven so far to be wrong on so many cases, so it cannot really be considered science. So moving on to the next point. This would be the third link, and I'll link it in a second. The first question is the scientists are going around using what's called the SETI, the search for extraterrestrial life. So the argument is humans, because what we're doing is we're sending out signals and we're doing all these stuff because we assume that aliens, anybody else, is going to assume design. So if that's the case, why don't scientists accept design of the universe?
Yes, because creationists don't believe in aliens. Pillbox.
Also, Ben Stein lied through his teeth about that. I mean, panspermia might be a possible hypothesis, but it's not like it's not like that's like integral within evolutionary theory, or like it's a part of it. It's a possible hypothesis alongside, and abiogenesis is probably more likely than aliens, coming from a distant planet and dumping the seeds to spawn us. It might be a good sci-fi thing, but it's not It's merely a hypothesis. It's not even on the same level of abiogenesis and
And all
evolution.
it does,
And then
all
you're
it does is
talking-
shift abiogenesis to a different planet.
And not only that, but you're talking about with panspermium, you're talking about basic, very, very basic life forms because of all the bacterium fossils that we have, in which we have microorganisms that we can actually see and observe on a very, very early primitive planet. So you're talking about very, very long time ago, and just injecting protocellular life forms. So that's a really bizarre thing.
So is evolution, do we think that evolution is possible on any other aspect of our universe, that they somehow could have evolved way faster, given the cosmological constants and all that of our universe? Is that even possible?
Well,
that is possible.
I
It is
have
possible.
heard.
I mean, I'm agnostic on it, really.
I think that the only thing is there is this part of a huge question when you start looking at Homo's Heibergensis in there, especially in Neanderthal. There is a drastic change at one point that a lot of people put up the questions: was there supposedly aliens that tricked the DNA and then we became who we are today? And there's nothing to show for it, but if you really wanted to go out on a limb, there's a possibility that it could be there, but we have absolutely zero evidence to even support something like that. So right now it's just a hypothesis and not even close to being a theory right now. And yeah, there is that gap where people, and it has left, questions in my mind where I would go, that possibility could be there. I don't know, but I'm not going to say that it's true because I don't have the evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how would you test it anyway?
Go ahead.
How would you test it? You can't.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you have a universe that is 14.5 billion years old, and our life, in which we get here, it took about 4 billion years of our planetary development. However, you have so many galaxies and so many planets and so many stars in the universe that it is pretty erroneous considering how uniform the entirety of the universe is and how conditions that we found here are found many different places as well. That wouldn't develop somewhere else. That's kind of really bizarre. But the thing is that you have to have a species that is, in order for it to get here, has to have the ability to figure out the warp of space-time. And I don't think that they're going to stop on this planet because it doesn't seem all too interesting. Just saying, if you figure that out, you're pretty much going all around the entirety of the universe, and you're just looking for things that'll excite you.
Yeah, I remember hearing a comedian say, going, an alien coming over here would be like somebody just going over to an Arby's and just being like, fuck that, I'm out.
Pretty much.
All right, so let's move on. The next thing was the fact that we cannot create a life. Since we cannot technically create life, since the molecules are smarter than us, therefore that must mean the evidence for the intelligent designer.
Really? Okay. Anybody want to take this one?
We can't create a tiny grain of sand from nothing. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm pretty sure I could take this one if you want.
You know what? I'll let Laboom do it. I'll step aside.
Okay, so through my research of 1 hour, it literally took me 1 hour on scholarly.google.com to find a huge number of theses relating to the formation of amino acids, different chemical compound sugars, adrenaline, glycine, nucleotides. I mean, there's huge amounts of research on developing stuff just in the primitive Earth conditions, as well as the formation of links and bonds between these chemicals so that they join together, which are peptides, I think, if that's the correct terminology.
Not peptides. It depends what you're looking at. I mean, if you're looking at how the first self-replicator came about. You're going to have to be looking at a nucleic acid, not a peptide.
No, I'm referring to the term of when the nucleic acids bond together through
That's polymerization.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So,
there does seem to be a lot of confusion between amino acids and nucleotides, and peptides and nucleic acids.
mm-hmm.
It's really, I'm just going to say this, it's really a matter of, just for the sake of simplification, it's really just a matter of recognizing how biology is an emergent property of the laws of chemistry.
Yes. In fact,
I don't want to go too much because the really complicated stuff is going to actually happen down the road. So, because we're going to go really in depth toward the end. So I don't want to repeat too much. So let's just kind of move on, and we'll definitely get on to the next stuff in a bit. Next thing is the human eye, the evolution of the human eye, and then in the brain as well. Actually, let's start off with the eye. My first thing is that the Cosmos, the new Cosmos series with Neil deGrasse Tyson, did a fantastic episode covering the eye evolution and like the species and how would it looked and exactly what it would have been like. And so it keeps going to this thing where the creationists tend to say, how did just a human eye just evolve in one or two goes or one or two, three generations? And it's obviously not. But if there's anybody that wants to go a little more specific into that.
Well, what's funny about the eye development is that alongside with the eye development, you also have the brain developing along with it. The more complex the eye, the more complex the nerve system that is required in order to process the data that comes from the eye.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I guess that makes sense. As the species started to develop more senses, and I know that the early, I guess they didn't really maybe have smell all that much, but sight, hearing, and all that stuff. So the brain eventually had to continue to grow, co-evolve, I guess, or co-evolve at the same time as the eye. And so it slowly began to grow and become. It wasn't two separate entities; they all depended on each other.
Actually, smell is arguably one of the first senses that formed. Cellular communication is based on conformations that are kind of synonymous with what we use to sniff. So the outside cell membrane is kind of a sniffer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
cool.
You've also got to remember that light detection. The
opsins.
Is coming from. Sorry?
I was just going to say, it started out with the formation of a certain protein called an opsin. And
you've got to remember that rhodopsins are found in bacteria. You can think of the photosynthetic pigments.
And the point being, I think that evolution built on simple forms and just added complexity over time. There's phyletic evidence for the progression, plenty within the current spectrum of life forms that exist today. So,
I mean, a classic example of it. They always dwell on human eye, but let's talk about. I find certain animals who have eye, especially certain birds and other ones that have these incredible distance things that I cannot see. I mean, I would love to have that kind of vision, but I don't. But
electromagnetic radiation,
waves
rather, and we can't see it.
Like the squid, for example. The squid has no blind spot. We have a blind spot. I mean, our eyes are not perfect. Like you could look at a falcon or a bird of prey. Like the way they're able to sight an animal and actually like swoop down on it. The fact of the matter is, it's really natural selection. Like picking the right necessary traits and weeding out the ones that are obviously sucky, as a way of being fit to our environment.
That's the octopus, is that right, Wolf? Hey, Wolf, was that the octopus?
I said squid.
Oh, squid. Oh, okay, because I thought the octopus had really good vision too, and also I wanted to bring about the octopus. When you go back, you realize as we look in our evolutionary process, they're actually probably the oldest known mammal that we have. They're like the oldest. They go way, way, way back, and they're still around after all this time. I know spiders are like number 2, I think, but don't quote me on that because I don't have my facts and I'm not looking off anything. So you guys may have to help me out in that department. But I remember something about octopus being like way up there as one of the oldest, species, and I forgot what some of the first ones looked like. Yeah. So, anyways, I didn't mean to go off on that one.
Octopus is not a mammal.
It's not a mammal.
No, it's a cephalopod mollusk.
Oh.
Okay, so let's move on. I don't know if anybody know there's anything about geology, but polonium halos.
Oh no.
Yeah, and see,
boy. I wish I had a geology friend in here. He could go off on it.
The only thing that I know is that I just linked to like a Wildwood Claire. If y'all have heard of her, she is a geologist on YouTube, and she is fantastic. She talked about polonium halos, and then of course I linked to a Talkorigins article. So, sorry, Creationists, we can't refute you here by ourselves. So we're just going to move on to the next one.
Well, I think the fact is we're all admitting that we're not experts in those fields to actually give a good, clear. Especially I'm not. I have friends who are that I would love to bring in there, and they could really break it down. So, and I can't. So there you go.
So the law of biogenesis, basically saying that life cannot come from non-life. I mean, the initial thought is, Louis Pasteur, and then basically, my first thought is, yet it's considered. Oh, well, go ahead.
Well, you see, we have life just now. Okay, it came from somewhere.
Right.
Now, either God created it, or it created itself.
Mm.
Because at some point in this Earth's history, given what we know about it, it had no life on it, and then it had life on it. Mm. And that's your moment of abiogenesis, going from no life to life.
And even if it was God, that is an abiogenesis event, but just saying.
Sorry, I didn't understand what you said there.
Even if God did it, so let's for the moment. Even if God were to do it, that would be considered abiogenesis.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right. Even if he had just decided to poof everything, instead
well, look at the Genesis account. On the third day, he created plants. That was the first life.
Mm.
So we had no life, then we had life.
Right.
So whichever version that you think is most likely, you're still saying that there wasn't a biogenesis event from non-life to life.
Right. All right. So the law of probabilities, basically saying the odds of everything happening in such a way that we exist is so low that the probability that we have to say this is obviously false. And my first reply to it as an atheist is saying, so the law of probabilities that everything that exactly happened in the Bible or exactly true happened in the way that they currently did is so low because there's so many possibilities it could have happened somewhere else. That means the Bible is also false. But outside of that, what would be? What anybody else would say on that?
I would just say Hoyle's fallacy.
What kind of fallacy was that? I didn't hear that.
Hoyle's fallacy.
Oh, what is that? I don't know.
Okay. Fred Hoyle, he was a physicist, and he did a calculation about how likely it was. I mean, he's in a really good position to look at abiogenesis and evolution, being a physicist. And what he did was he worked out that a tornado in a junkyard producing a 747 and the probability of that. But the problem with that is that the way it's calculated is the probability of all the pieces coming together in one fell swoop.
Hmm.
And if it's not right, you take it all apart and you start again. So if you got all of the pieces in the right order 3/4 of the way through and then you went wrong, you'd have to undo it all and start again. But that's not how evolution works. It keeps what works. It discards what doesn't work and it builds on what it's got. Because if you take Hoyle's fallacy and apply it to a jigsaw, you would never finish a jigsaw. And yet people finish jigsaws every day. Because when a piece fits, you leave it there and then go hunting out the next bit.
That is a great analogy. I like that.
It's tantamount to saying, here's where we are, therefore the improbability of this equals God.
Yeah, they also did a good analogy of, saying, let's say you had a whole deck of cards, 52 cards. You picked it up, you throw it in the air, and then you dropped it, all the cards came down, and you picked them up one by one, put them in the deck back, and then you looked at the cards and go, wow, what are the probabilities of me getting this, this order of cards? Well, that does, yeah.
The other thing is, if you look at the probability of getting a perfect hand, all people get the perfect hand in bridge, so that everybody gets from ace through king of one suit. Now, it's highly unlikely, but if, when you're dealing the hands, if to the diamond hand you deal a club, you have to put it back in the pack. And you basically keep going until you find a diamond. You are going to end up dealing 4 perfect hands. Bridge.
Yeah, and I'll actually take it a step further. I feel like this is an argument from ignorance in that, they don't know the mathematics. Therefore, the only possible explanation is their deity in the sky. And I feel like that's really just a failure in recognizing the measurements and the quantifications of matter and energy. I mean, if you leave that with the laws of physics, it is self-organizing, they're self-replicating, it can produce emergent properties like stars, galaxies, black holes, and also life. It is really just a matter of just of recognizing through the laws of physics and chemistry and the exact time and rate of billions of years for that to actually occur. And they could really just do their own research in this. But if they want to say, no, but I'm just, I'm almost done. If they want to say like an all-powerful entity created it, they have to be honest and ask where that entity come from. Otherwise, they could just say matter and energy produced this and be done with it.
Yeah.
And I know what you want. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
If you look at the probability calculation, and you calculate the probability of winning the lottery, then calculate the probability of the lottery being won twice, and then the probability of the lottery being won 3 times. Now then work out how long the lottery's been running for and how many winners there have been. And the chances of the lottery being won that number of times is ridiculously small. And yet someone wins it almost every week.
You know what I crack up when I listen to these creationists do this, just like we just admitted in here as a group, as myself, that when we got into the geology part, we admitted that we don't have, or our expertise is not in geology, so we didn't care to answer it. What I always get a kick out of these creationists is I see all the time that they act as an expert, but when you get down to where they get their information, have they been in a laboratory to actually study these situations and how they actually work, cross-reference particular things, which they don't. I could take, if they did do this, I might take them a little bit seriously, but that is not the case. And here's another thing that really bothers me, and I think Fiona will say to this, and I had this happen before. I saw this guy who was arguing against creationism or against evolution, and he put down Dr. PhD. And I was curious. I was like, oh, wow, I'd like to see what this guy has to say. He obviously knows his stuff. And when he was done, he had these just face-palming, terrible arguments that I was able to just destroy. And I asked him, I said, hey, you said doctor and PhD. Can you please tell me what your PhD is in? And he wanted to divert the question in front of all these people. Well, once we got it out of him, he had a PhD in theology. It had nothing to do with the science that he was talking about. And this right here, he was seeing people get lost on this. They go and they see doctor or PhD, and they go, ooh, they know. If Fiona knows this, if you're a PhD, which I'm not one, you actually are focused very diligently on this particular field that you're involved with. That's why when I go to a PhD who is like in geology, I ask them questions in those parts because they are experts in that point. This guy is not an expert in any of the fields that he was talking about, but he acted as so. And people got to be very careful when, especially these answers from Genesis. And I'll throw this last in, and I'll be quiet. Is I have only a bachelor's of biology. And I get these people that come in and they have bachelors in particular fields. And, yeah, they may have some credibility to a point, but I wouldn't even consider myself an expert to go up and start giving a lecture on and tell people how certain things are, because I'm still not an expert in that field. And I love how they get these, in my opinion, low-grade, mediocre people who are not really experts. And, again, people fall into this because they hear, oh, he's a biologist. Oh, he has a PhD. In what? Please give me what it is. Oh, you're a PhD in theology or a PhD in building bridges? That's not the field we're looking at, and people got to be careful of that. And I'm
okay, so I'm just going to say there's one last thing, and we'll move on. It reminds me of that little thing with the Simpsons where this guy is on trial, and he says, you're a doctor, correct? I mean, he said, yes, I have a PhD in truthology from Christian Tech.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well,
so next
before we move on, completely, I do want to comment.
Can't hold
that I got to. There is no probability worked in when you're working on actual science. None of these sciences work on probability except for quantum mechanics, and that's a very, 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 very small thing, and it has nothing to do with when you're talking about the results of something. But even with it, you still, based on the analogies we gave, that probability of you getting that specific hand that you already had is 1 because you did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's move on. Fruit flies. They've done all types of fruit fly experiments, and with all the things that they've done, generations of generations, because we know that they evolve they evolve incredibly fast, and so they've been doing this for years, and still they are fruit flies. Therefore, evolution is false.
Fail.
WTF, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, they specifically say there's no macroevolution.
Yeah.
When it comes to this very particular claim, houseflies don't need to adapt. They already have their mechanisms, and for basically reproducing and giving offsprings is just fine for survival. They don't need to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
That easy.
Yeah, and really,
And I didn't even need a PhD in truthology to come up with that one.
Plus,
and the whole thing. I'm just gonna make a note in terms of microevolution and macroevolution. It's really a semantic fallacy. It's just a matter of time. Macroevolution is simply microevolution with a bunch of generations in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, not only that, though. The one thing I hear that so much, but I also don't ever hear the distinction, is that macroevolution is a change at the species level or above.
Well,
And so the second that you see a new species, that is macroevolution.
Bingo.
yeah.
It is a false dichotomy. It's been manufactured because the creationists were no longer able to deny the evolution as defined is an observed occurrence, i.e. a change in allele frequencies within a population over time. So they created this false dichotomy to allow them to accept one part of it and still cling on to their creationist ideas. That's what those two terms are all about. It's basically, in a way, fitting wheels onto your goalpost, painting on go faster stripes, and running like the clappers with it.
And if you look on my screen for just a moment, these are all related. These are all related together.
Ah, yes.
But they start with this one, they move over to here, and this one, that one, that one, that one. And by the time you get to this one, these two in no way.
Yeah, also, I'm just going to...
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah. Well, salamanders is cool.
Are you there, Wolf?
By the way, that's an
I'm
actual
there.
example of macroevolution. You can that's a living
California
example.
salamanders. It's a very good example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you have it. What they call macroevolution, a new species they cannot interbreed.
And you know, there are a lot of, I've run across some atheists that have a problem with macroevolution. I understand why, but again, a lot of people don't actually not only study the fossil records, but as I always tell people, you know, get into a laboratory, go ask, do your research, go in there and actually learn how this stuff really works, and you can actually, at the end, if you are not convinced, fine, but at least you did your homework.
Yes.
And like I keep plugging, scholarly.google.com has a lot of theses and experiments and papers on various subjects, on anything you really want to know.
Let's see. Let's move on to our next one then. Punctuated equilibrium is just an excuse to show that because we don't have enough fossils. Anybody want to cover that?
Go ahead. I just want to say we got a lot of fossils. If you actually see it, we got hundreds of thousands of fossils. Oh my God, we got Sam here, and he could probably verify this. But if you go to Berkeley, oh my gosh, you can. And I've been in there. You can. It's overwhelming how much is in there. I don't even know how they fit all of this stuff in there. And not only that, I haven't even been to all the places. I even think in England, Oxford, there. I've heard that there's quite a bit going on over there too. So, yeah, there's a lot of places around the United States and around the world where we got a lot of fossils. And let me throw this last one. It was at Homo habilis that was in Jordan, close to Russia. They have a really good skull and almost a full bone of some newer ones that just happened in the Wall Street Journal back in October. Was showing this, and I loved how they brought it up, but it was immediately kind of pushed down because it was a huge smoking gun. And I heard a lot of creationists, they have never wanted to touch this one because it's like, there it is. I mean, what are you going to do? It's given us everything we need to look at. So, anyways, anybody else go?
Before we get going, I wanted Sam to introduce himself. What his beliefs are, and then what he does for a living. Sam, if you're here. You can do that.
Yeah, sorry. I am an atheist, and I work currently, although I'm sort of in an in-between situation. I've worked in the past as a scientific researcher in the area of computational biology, focusing on peptide mass spectrometry, which just sounds like words to most people, but tomorrow I will receive my the conferral of my master's degree in biology, and in the fall I'll be starting a PhD in the area of bioinformatics.
And I keep thinking of that bit where, if y'all ever watched Good Burger, where where Ed is looking at the contract, the real stupid guy, and he's like, I know some of these words.
Well, the thing is...
nice reference.
Yeah, which is fun. The thing is that I forgot to mention earlier, but I've actually looking at Sam's thesis recently, and I've been reading it. Well, there's a lot of words that I'm unfamiliar with, don't know, but the easiest part is about the internet is I can open the second page, find the definition of that word, and then find out how to pronounce it, like protium is a new word for me, so I had to learn how to pronounce that properly.
Yeah, you need to basically know the word proteome in order to understand. That's definitely one of the words you need to know to understand my thesis.
Which after I grabbed it and looked at it, and now I understand it. Now I know what it means and know how you're using it.
All right, so we're going to move on, and this is probably perfect timing. The next claim is abiogenesis fails at the laboratory settings.
Ooh, let me at it.
All right, Fiona, you take your first crack.
There was a paper back in 2009, Lincoln and Joyce, and they were able to get RNA molecules to self-replicate in a protein-free system. No enzymes, just those RNA molecules. RNA is different from DNA in that it can carry out catalytic activity. DNA can't do that. DNA has to rely on proteinaceous enzymes. But RNA can catalyze reactions. And the Lincoln and Joyce paper showed that two RNA molecules could catalyze self-replication when they were together in a protein-free system. And that removes the problem of the chicken and the egg when you are wondering about how DNA first popped up. I don't think DNA is going to have been the first replicator. There was another paper in December of last year, and this one was an interesting one in that they discovered that if you put, I think it was a pyrimidine nucleotide mixed in with ribose, a pyrimidine base, that nucleosides formed, as in the base stuck itself onto the ribose sugar. And in the right conditions, those nucleosides would polymerize into a big long chain, i.e. an RNA molecule. And this is all in a test tube. And it was all protein-free. There were no enzymes involved. It's pure chemistry.
Is that just a proof of concept, or is that even in the
Yes.
works of thinking that that's possibly how it happened, or is that just like that's an alternative to how it could have happened?
What it shows is that given that it happened, it's shown that it is not chemically impossible. You see, I think one of the things that we're having to do here is in trying to investigate abiogenesis, what we're having to say is, look, what sort of things would need to have happened? And we're having to work backwards on it. So 2009 we had Lincoln and Joyce getting RNA molecules self-replicating. Great. But then, well, how could the RNA molecules arise? So the paper just last December is looking at how those RNA molecules could have arisen. Just purely by chemistry.
And this is what we talk about when we say that science can make predictions. We knew the environment of the Earth and everything at a certain times. We know what chemicals and what things are around in the Earth, and we can narrow down what doesn't work and what does work and make predictions based on that to get to where we are right now and being able to make those these kind of findings. Sam, since you're just in, do you have anything you would like to add on to that? Any other cool, really bits about abiogenesis, or just the controversial bits you may have heard from creationist claims in the past that you would like to just demolish?
Well, Fiona does. I should preface this with I'm not a biochemist, nor am I really a molecular biologist. I'm closer to being a molecular biologist than a biochemist, but I sort of have a weird area of interest, which is more towards genetics. But from my understanding of what most of the current work is on abiogenesis, Fiona pretty much hit the nail on the head. My understanding is that, like, we know the basic biochemistry and that the basic building blocks can be there and start to, sort of have this proto-metabolic activity. But and we also know that it's pretty easy to get membranes to form using lipids, I mean, those you can do that just by understanding it by dropping oil into water. The chemistry is literally that basic. The really tough part of abiogenesis isn't either of those parts, even though those are usually the parts that are challenged the most. It's that little connection to where you get the first minimal cell. And Craig Venter is actually doing work on genetically constructing the minimal amount of genes that you can have. I'm forgetting the bacterium that he's using, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But he's working on what the minimum set of genes is that is a requirement for bacterial life as we know it, and that's an important caveat that I'm adding there. And a lot of synthetic biology is along those routes, and I'd say that it's by all means an exciting area of research, and we cannot claim that we have a comprehensive answer, but at the same time, I think that creationists tend to overstate the fact that there isn't a comprehensive answer to mean that there is no answer, and that is just not true.
All right, perfect. Now we're going to go back down to the more layman things.
Before we go back into simple form too, I have heard people that get a little bit technical, and probably those that have studied the field will be more familiar with it. But one of the things that I've heard made as an argument is that there is something called homochirality. Am I pronouncing that right, guys?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, Pasteur in the 1800s actually discovered this, and what it is when molecules can be in the same molecule can be in a different configuration such that it bends light in one direction or another, and you can call these left-handed molecules or right-handed molecules.
Yeah.
Now, I might be mixing this up, but I believe in biological systems we have only left-handed amino acids, and whenever you do the Miller-Urey type experiments and you synthesize amino acids, they tend to be in a mixture known as a racemic mixture, which means that they have both left-handed and right-handed molecules. And the question is, well, why do we only have left-handed molecules? Well, it turns out that they've done work where they tend to see that once one chiral configuration is established as being dominant, there's a tendency for the system to just sort of go in that direction and become entirely towards that chiral configuration. I hope that that's a good explanation to the lay people. I didn't want to be too technical.
Yeah. If you think of the molecules as being mirror images of each other.
Right, and one of the key questions is, why is it that biology has, and I think you're right, I think it's all left, but it's one or the other, whereas in natural conditions it usually produces both. But I think some of the most promising research is on there is selective molecular absorption in certain crystalline structures. I don't know what the studies are that are related to that, but there are certain conditions where you see that certain crystalline structures select out the left or the right, and they think that probably had something to do with the biogenesis.
Also, I mean, we have to remember that, while we want to believe that sometimes it's nice to believe that everything is selected for. Sometimes evolution can be historically contingent. So this could have just been something that happened in the past, and we've just continued on that direction. Because that's our history.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Let's move on to the next claim. There are no true facts, only interpretations. So this is why creationists and evolutionists can look at the same data or the same facts and get different interpretations from it.
Wow, where do you go with that one?
I mean, me personally, I would have to say there's obviously certain things that we can establish are as facts that have you can't really interpret. Like when electromagnetic fields form around electrical currents, as there's an electric flow. That's facts. There's no interpretation. That's just, it is what it is. It's a brute fact.
Well, Can I point out one thing here? I've noticed that the people that make that sort of argument Let's say, for example, they're making the argument within molecular biology, okay? And they say, but it could be interpreted this way. Because they are not aware of other factors that dictate that it can't have happened that way. In other words, they don't know enough to realise why their interpretation is not going to work. Because they are not aware of other knowledge. They've narrowed into this little wee bit, and they've built themselves a pet argument. I mean, I've had somebody who's done that in such a way that the argument means that sodium chloride does not form naturally on this planet. Yeah. And you say, wait a minute, here's your problem. Because they didn't understand some of the chemistry behind it. So in a way, it's like an argument from ignorance.
Yep.
And that's
just to add on that.
You can't interpret the evidence, you can't interpret the data if you don't understand the field. And I'm not talking about being set in your ways or being dogmatic, but you can't tell me anything about the chemistry of chlorine if your argument means that sodium chloride doesn't exist. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
No, that's fine. Wolf, you had something you were going to say?
Yeah, and just to add on that, it's really a matter of models of predictive power being of utility for people. And here's the thing: we actually have practical applications of evolutionary theory. I mean, this is consistent with the whole issue of antibiotic resistance, where viruses and microorganisms develop resistance against medicines that would otherwise kill them. So, and also the same with pesticide resistance. Pests developing like resistance via natural selection against like pesticides that would usually kill it. I mean, you know, there's agriculture, there's medicine, and there's also like evolutionary computations where we can use a direct analogy of how species become more complex and diverse through actually. I'm not very articulated on that particular field, but it's really a matter of like applying algorithms in that evolutionary sense. But my point is that there are applications that we could actually use to improve our own human condition. And on the other hand, we cannot. We have no real application for creationism.
Yeah.
Well, the issue that I see with this, and to me it's troubling because here's the thing: is when I can talk to an evolutionary biologist. In fact, one of very pretty prominent evolutionary biologist sat on my thesis committee, and I can ask him, how do you... Yeah, someone's echoing. Sorry, that's distracting me. Oh, it's Suzuki Das. Sorry about that. I'm just a little bit... That was just a little bit distracting. Sorry, guys. But what I was saying is like the... actually, the Boom knows this, but... the chair of my thesis committee is quite a prominent bacterial speciologist, which means that he studies how species of bacteria diverge. And one of the big things is that when I ask him, when he talks about how species diverge in bacteria and how these things evolve, I can get an answer as to how I can go in the lab and begin to test these, or how I can go out into nature and take samples and begin to test these things. When it comes to creationism, I go, okay, let's just grant that we have two different theoretical interpretations. What hypotheses can I generate? What can I go into the lab and do? And inevitably, there's nothing. And the key thing of science is that you always generate more questions than you answer whenever you have an explanation.
Yeah. So that sounds good. Let's move on to the next point. If y'all remember, y'all have heard of Mary Schweitzer and how they found soft tissue and things like that inside, an old T-Rex bone, which many creationists turn and say that, look at that. bones are younger than we think they are. Now, of course, I've actually exchanged emails with Mary Schweitzer, and she's told me herself. One, she is a Christian, but she's also a scientist. The idea of these bones being younger is stupid. It had no effect on. It was not a question about age, but of how long DNA could actually reside inside the fossils themselves. So that's where you can watch the videos, and they kind of do some really clever editing to make it sound like how science is against it because of the concept that they think it means the young bones are younger. But no, the argument was with Mary Schweitzer's hypothesis was the general idea of how long DNA would last inside of fossils. And now that they're questioning that, the scientific community stood against that because from their very knowledge, from everything that they've learned so far, DNA only can last for so long. But again, but of course now I'm assuming they're starting to see now that they're seeing more instances of that, and that DNA does last longer than they thought.
But it's not DNA with the dinosaur bones in Schweitzer. It's soft tissue.
Yeah. Okay. Soft tissue.
It's not anything about DNA.
Okay. Good.
Well, it's not really soft tissue per se, but the stuff that she extracted from it was after she did a mineral rinse of the fossilized bones. So these were fossilized bones. The iron that was inside the fossilized bones allowed it to preserve the stuff that she got, the red bits, and I can't remember what that actually turned out to be. But it's
it's a breakdown product of hemoglobin.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's exactly it. But no, it wasn't soft tissue. It in no way is soft tissue. It has no properties of soft tissue.
Right. It only appeared that way because of the acid she had poured on it, or something to that extent.
Yeah, and it was the tissue that she got was basically coming from collagen, which is the rubbery bit on the end of your nose or the stiff bit on your ear. And that's really tough stuff.
Yeah, it's exactly like the bone that has been fossilized, but it's the only probably remaining bit left.
Yeah. If you acid treat bone, you end up with just collagen left.
Yeah.
It was rubbery.
All right, the next one, and prepare yourself, Fiona. I know you're going to want to throw something at the screen. There are no such thing as beneficial mutations.
Oh, jeez.
Bullshit. Yeah, I love that one. That's my favorite one.
All right.
What's interesting is that earlier I posted a link to the guy who did the bacterium experiments, including Sam can actually vouch on the guy who does do the mutation experiments on top of that. But I actually found the guy who was referenced in the conversation between Conservapedia and I have 1 second. I'll find
Richard Lenski.
Yeah, Richard Lenski.
Yeah.
Because and the thing is, if you actually go to Richard Lenski's website, you can actually find the entirety of his thesis on the step-by-step of the development of the bacterium he was working with.
Yeah.
And the mutation allowed a higher chance of survivability with the citrate absorption. It allowed them to survive significantly better.
Yeah.
It might be the best designed experiment that I've ever read in a paper, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, I say that full well knowing that I've read Yamanaka's paper on induced pluripotent stem cells that won him a Nobel Prize, and those experiments are far inferior to how brilliant Lenski's set up. I mean, they've done literally everything you could think of in terms of trying to test everything.
And can somebody cover, because a lot of times they'll say it's, I'm going to ask two parts. I'll ask the first part, how to clarify that this is a new mutation and not a rearrangement of current information to get, that whatever, so how do you clarify that it is something new and completely new information and not just a rearrangement.
That's a red herring.
Well, so I'm in bioinformatics, so right, I know what information is at the literature level because I've published on it. And first off, this claim is just complete bullshit. It doesn't work from a computer perspective. It doesn't work from a biological perspective. When biologists say information, they mean non-randomness. That's really all they mean. It's and I can explain and I'll use a screen share to explain later. I can explain that later, but the second part of it is let's say that I have my hard drive, right, and I have Skype on my hard drive. Obviously, I have Skype. That's how I have a bunch of you on Skype. And let's say that I download the new update. That's a mutation, and that's adding to, like, let's say it has several plugins that it adds. That's really just a rearrangement of bits on my hard drive. I'm not like importing new bits into my hard drive, but you would hardly ever have someone saying, "Oh, you don't have new information," because oftentimes, and this is how hard drives work, similar to genomes in some sense, is that hard drives, when you delete something, all you're doing is deleting where the register is addressed. Similarly, if you delete a gene, all you're doing is inactivating it. So if you then duplicate a segment, you can use segments of that deleted gene. In the same way, you can use, memory addresses of a deleted file. And no one would ever argue that when I add a Skype plugin, I'm not adding more information to my hard drive.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, what's the other one they like to say? Oh, common design, common designer. Like, how do you differentiate, say, it all comes from one similar, coding, and it's just a rearrangement of that coding.
Again, go into the lab and generate hypotheses about how that code came about.
I was about ready to,
They actually test them.
Yeah, that's the big thing I've said before. They need to get in a laboratory to actually see how these things work. Then they wouldn't say these stupid things.
Yeah, because they're very good at coming up with hypotheses, but not testing it.
Go ahead, Wolf. What were we going to say?
The cell has sequence information inside the cell, like it's biological machinery. It's put in a coordinated fashion. It can only come from a mind. Unless you're too stupid to realize that each cell is a triumph of natural selection, and it's really just a matter of recognizing how they can become more complex and diverse over a serious amount of time. I mean, like, seriously, these creation tards need to, like, open, like, a friggin' science book and actually figure out how these processes work.
But
I can't just attack me.
No. I said not you. I said creationist, like people who don't like you, Fiona. You actually do the work. You do your homework. You don't make bullshit analogies and then go off with an assumed conclusion. That's begging the question.
But this is the thing that I've always keep telling people, just like I was having this conversation with somebody who is a mechanic. I can read about being a mechanic all I want, but actually getting in there and building an engine is a whole different ball game in doing it. And I've noticed that when I got into biology and do what I do now in the environmental field, actually the whole ball game has changed when I actually have to do the work. I can read till I'm blue in the face, but once you have to do, collect samples, see how the samples work, do the research, and go through the motions in the laboratory, it's a whole different ball game, and it's a game changer. And this is a big thing that I have with people, like just the other night we had with this creationist who was just a young Earth creationist, and they kept wanting to say, well, how can you haven't proven to me anything about the changes in macroevolution. And I said, I can't do that because you really, again, need to come in a laboratory. And I've told this, live in Huntington Beach to Ray Comfort, and he wants this thing to be said. Words are not going to do it. I can't tell you how to build an engine until you walk you into a place and show you how to actually mechanically build an engine. It's the same process.
Well, my whole thing is like, okay, you can say that. How do I test it? How do I test? Because I can test the mechanisms of evolution. I can test all of these things. I've read papers. I understand how, and I've done the calculations. I've taken an evolutionary biology course. I've taken multiple. I understand how they test these things. Whereas when I ask them, for mechanisms of design, they go, "Oh, well, that's beyond us." That's literally that's the best response I've gotten, and it's ridiculous because let's say that I'm designing an engine, right? We can say if I see an engine in the middle of the road, I can assume it was designed because I can go to a factory and then watch people design it in that way, and I can actually examine that process.
I mean, if you have people who have no idea of the concept of an engine, and then and if an engine was in the middle of nowhere and people just happened to come about it, and you had no idea what an engine was, you kind of would assume that was just a natural formation. As well, that's what's funny about that whole thing, is that just because we are familiar with the concept of an engine, that's what allows us to assume that it is built. The other thing is that with it, if we get nothing useful out of their claims, we can dash it away without really needing to handle it too much, because it is a useless claim. It doesn't serve any purpose except for stunting intellectual growth, and that's kind of what a lot of this pre-sup, a lot of these creationist people are doing. And you can actually ask them specifically, and they will tell you that it's to shut up people and to stop conversations. Well, if your goal is to do that, then your goal is to stop intellectual inquiry.
Yeah. We were talking about testing these hypotheses. One of the very telling things was something that Behe said on the stand in the Dover trial. And he was describing an experiment that could be done to determine whether or not the flagellum was irreducibly complex and thus had to be designed. So he described all this experiment. And then counsel for Kitts Miller said, "And have you done the experiment?" And he said, "No."
And I love how he used... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Finish.
It means that what he was saying was, I can come up with this hypothesis, and until you prove it wrong, it stands. Now, he's a scientist. He knows that's not how science works. And why has he not done the experiment himself?
Exactly.
And it's because his previous attempt at this sort of thing, running a computer simulation to get two amino acids of a protein to change, the odds were some weird high figure. But it was pointed out that he was assuming a starting population of about 20,000. And then the council asked him, "And how many bacteria are there in 1 ton of soil?" And then, so how many bacteria will be on the planet? And it turned out that this impossible change would, at the odds that he had calculated, be happening once every 2 days. This is why he hasn't done his own experiments.
Yeah,
because the theory sounds great, but he knows if he tests it, he's running into trouble.
Yeah. Well, to make a great point is either put up or shut up. Either you put up the data or you shut up about saying that you're right, because you're not until you demonstrate it.
And I was trying. Oh, go. All I wanted to say quickly is I was trying to also, when he was doing that, is why was he trying to focus only on a prokaryotic cell? That one kind of cracked me up, but trying to use that as a way of his intelligent design. But I thought that was funny. But that's where I stood. But anyways, go ahead.
I was just going to say that actually leads right into what was actually next on the list was irreducible complexity, and I was actually going to bring up the Kitzmiller v. Dover and how it's been refuted, but now Fiona's got it. So let's just unless anybody else has anything else to add on to that,
I
we can move on.
I would
to
say
the next
one thing here. When you're looking at irreducible complexity, what they're doing is they're looking at the final product, and they are working backwards, removing bits. And saying, well, if you remove this bit, it doesn't work. But that is like saying, there is no way you can cut somebody's hair because I can show you that it is impossible to uncut it.
Well,
that's the problem. The arrow of time only goes in one direction.
Yeah,
you can't unbreak a cut. But because you can't unbreak it, doesn't make it impossible to break.
Yeah, and there's also the mousetrap analogy where he basically took a mousetrap, took the spring out, and used it as a tie holder. Now,
yeah, that was Kenneth Miller. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they talk about the bacterium flagella that propels certain bacteria forward. Well, the thing is that in another bacterium that has exactly the same protein structure, but some of it's been taken out, or some of it isn't there. In the bubonic plague, it uses that for an injection system to inject its poison into the cell that it wants to basically put its stuff into, and that's essentially how it's able to spread its illness pretty quickly and sufficiently. So it's missing a lot of proteins that are in the motor side of it, but it works pretty well as an injector.
All right, so let's move on to the fine-tuning of the universe and physics in general. Now, my first thought of this is, kind of the basic. Yeah, it's very true that the very beginning, say the Big Bang and whatnot, the cosmological constants that were required for our life and all this kind of stuff to where that things don't immediately go to shit is very, very, very special. It's very narrow, very small, but it doesn't necessitate an intelligent design. It's just I think they talk about the anthropic principle as saying that we just happen to be at that perfect amalgamation. They showed like a graph, and there's two different lines, and at a certain point where they met up, boom, that's where we are. That it's incredibly possible that that's how it is, and that we just were the we were the puddle inside that found itself inside of a hole and just going, hey, look, like this universe was designed or this hole was designed just for me. But I felt like I was gonna say one more thing about it and I forgot. So if anybody else has anything they want to add,
well, I have to say on that point, when I hear that statement, when I hear any creationists talk about them needing to be humble about God, that's one of the most arrogant statements I ever hear by them, because when you really look at the universe just in general, yeah, there are a few things that are working out, but there's a large majority of what's going on in our own galaxy. Let's just use that. I don't want to spread it out too far, but our own galaxy. I mean, if you really think so far from what they've seen, and it was just a little while ago where they have been shooting these telescopes. My friend who's an astrophysicist was talking to me about this, and he was excited about it because I think they got up to about 42,000 maybe planets that showed that it had oxygen, base, carbon atoms, phosphates, and so forth, and they could tell because it's like a blue coating like ours. But you've got to think about 42,000 right now out of how many billions and billions and billions and billions of planets or solar systems are in our own galaxy. Well, if you think about that success rate, it's extremely low. It's not even, we're barely even tipping on 1% out of 100. So that's not a very positive success rate. So I don't see fine-tuning going on, especially when you look at our own solar system. Is Jupiter considered to be fine-tuning? No, it's totally chaotic. And we can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the real problem with fine-tuning is that if you actually change the measurements, you could end up with a different universe than our own. We don't actually know. But there's nothing to say that we wouldn't end up with just a different universe. It's different types of life or no life at all, or different arrangement of planets and the structures and all that kind of stuff. So it's specific for us because we end up in a universe specifically where we could survive. That's kind of how that works.
Now, it's funny because Alexander Vilenkin, I was watching a video, a whole bunch of cosmologists about their feeling on fine-tuning, and Alexander Vilenkin said something to the effect of, a really great argument for creationism is if the cosmological constant would have been closer to 0. But it's not. And so, just by the fact alone of how far it is away from 0, and that actually it could be done better. There's possibilities of other universes that existed with a better cosmological constant, and life would be more, could sustain much easier than it does now. If that's not an argument against perfect intelligent design, then we don't know what else is.
Well, and you can also put into consideration, I'll let you go, Sam, is how many things out there is ready to kill us at any point, and we don't have a place to really go. I mean, we're looking for Mars as a place, as a second planet, but yeah, good luck there. Anyways, go, Sam.
Well, I don't even whenever I hear someone say this, I always go, well, what do you mean by fine-tuned? Again, you're dealing with people who aren't defining things in any sort of meaningful or scientific... Like, you get two versions of it, which is, by fine-tuned, I mean we have our specific constants. That means nothing. And then they say, and then the other response I get is, by fine-tuned, I mean life-permitting universe. And that's almost it's almost begging the question when you're like, how did we make a universe that was life-permitting? It's one of those things where it's an interesting question. I don't know how it would, I see it as an open question. I don't see it as, something that's meaningful, and I don't see why fine-tuned necessarily reflects life, because Anti-Citizen X, who's a friend of mine, did a video recently. He made the point, we might as well say that the universe is fine-tuned for black holes.
Oh, good point. I like that one.
And the other thing is,
there's going to be
if you look at it,
is the fine-tune of the universe as well.
If you look at the size of the universe, and you compare that to the size of the temperate zones on our planet, there's not very much that's actually habitable. There are places on our planet we can't live.
Right.
Absolutely. And not only that, if you're getting down to fine-tuning with human beings, when you look at genetics, I mean, is a kid being born with cancer cells before they go into full remission by the age of 3 or 6 years old? Is that considered to be fine-tuning?
That's the fall.
What was that?
That's the fall.
I mean, the vast majority, the vast majority of the universe is not suitable for life. So how on earth can you say that is a universe fine-tuned for life? If it was fine-tuned in such a way that it was all suitable for life, we would be able to jump around in space, no problem. Because that's what most of it consists of.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that the universe isn't fine-tuned for anything. Everything is fine-tuned for the universe. It's the other way around. It's not at all fine-tuned for anything. It is what it is. And the stuff that happens to inhabit inside it just happens to correlate because of its ability to match the universe.
Like polar bears are fine-tuned for the Arctic, but I wouldn't give them a snowflakes in the Namibian desert.
I'd just like to point out that I bought these glasses some time ago, and my ears were in exactly the right spot. I want to point that out.
Well, see, your ears were, your head was designed for just like the hole was designed for the puddle.
All right, so let's move on. The problem of having half wings and half lungs. There's no such thing as a half lung. So how can these species have produced a lung now? And I think of like the early the early tetrapods, early fish, whatever. Probably saying that wrong, but they had gas bladders that originally for exchange of, to be able to get some oxygen from the water, and it was also using for steering. And then over time, genetic mutations allowed to be able to pull oxygen from worse water, like more oxygen deprived water, and eventually air. And then for wings, saying that, say for dinosaurs, they say, oh well, it can't be birds. Why would they have wings? What's good is a half a wing? Well, of course, at first a genetic mutation that allowed for feathers or a feather, and then so on and so forth. It's good for using of mating. Another female dinosaur was like, "Fuck, that's hot," and let him get, and then for mating, and so forth and so and eventually we have birds and stuff like that. But
and Chef, just to add on that, wings are also good if you're getting the hell away from something that's kind of catastrophe, like a major explosion from something large from space smashing into the Earth about 65 million years ago.
Right, and so then that eventually happened. Eventually, wings started to form, and eventually they started to fly, and then so on and so forth. But I guess it just comes down to that.
It might be more appropriate to say wings were remembered, because when fish basically fly through the water, or and so
that's a good point. That's true. Fiona? Is that? I'm just curious if that makes sense.
No, I don't think that they're.
No, I mean, yes, I know we can say that they fly through the water, but it's completely different because we can all fly through water.
Yeah, it doesn't make. Yeah, I don't think they're homologous structures.
But
I'm
to actually fly in air, that's a trick. That's a trick I would love to be able to do.
Yeah, fine-tuning my ass for humans. I can't fly. I can't run really fast. I can only breathe in an environment that's like 20% of the atmosphere instead of something that's 75% covering of the Earth. It's fine.
And I even got to use binoculars to see something real far away. So
yeah.
Well, this is the dumbest argument that I usually hear. What good's half an eye? Well, I mean, it's the funniest when you hear it from someone who's wearing glasses. Because I'm sure that having poor vision is better than being blind.
Yeah.
And as someone with allergy-induced asthma, it's better that I can wheeze and get enough oxygen than it is for me to just not breathe. It's like if these people. It's a frustratingly stupid argument, because if you apply any amount of critical thought, if you imagine that there's we can see with flying squirrels what use it can be to have sort of half a wing. It helps you not fall as quickly, because when you think about it, flying to a certain degree is just graceful falling.
Falling with style.
I was just about to say that.
I didn't want to quote Toy Story, but...
Oh, you have to quote Toy Story.
All right, so let's move on. Probably the one that's a little bit more difficult, human consciousness. Being that we don't know where human consciousness comes from, therefore, God.
Why not Ganesh?
Yeah.
Well, the thing about human consciousness is that develops in tangent with our own development. I mean, the more we develop into what we are currently, the more our intellect also develops. If you go back to ancient ancestors, you have them just basically using basic tools and stuff like that. They don't come up with, extreme. They're not coming up with like particle physics at that particular state in time, but just really basic tools, as you can see other great apes use. They use basic fundamental tools to get things done, and the development in which our lifespan ran on the development of our frontal cortexes. So that allowed for us to develop pretty well with our consciousness that we currently have.
Well,
hey, Sam's going to leave, so I wanted to hear a word from Sam.
Yeah, let Sam, if you want to say one last thing, and, if you have a channel, anything you want to promote or whatever. and
You
to
know,
creationists.
well, I mean, I guess I can promote my channel. I haven't been making too many videos lately because of, well, locking myself in my room and finishing my thesis, as well as meeting a nice young lady in that time.
Fiona, you rascal. Oh,
Yeah, you go, boy.
We joke, but no, I'm kidding. No, I think that, when it comes to consciousness, I mean, first off, there's not a complete answer out there. I don't even know if it's formulated scientifically. But here's the thing: is there's plenty of evidence to pretty much. I think you can safely say that if you know enough neuroscience and you know enough psychology, that it's the mind is a function or an activity or whatever you want to label it of the brain, and I think it's pretty clear if you've read any neuroscience and taken just introductory psychology.
Absolutely.
And if you've ever had a beer, for instance, I mean, we understand that if you ingest chemicals, and then they affect your consciousness, it doesn't make sense to say that it's anything else but a biological. Obviously, that's a very trivial piece of evidence, but it doesn't make sense to say, oh, this is some mystical thing, when in fact it's a huge area of research at the moment. And I think that these arguments often come from just complete neuroscientific ignorance.
Absolutely. I mean, how do they even know what neurotransmitters are reacting to when somebody says, therefore God or Ganesh or therefore, whatever, Zeus or the pink unicorn? I mean, I don't know what that person's seeing at that moment. I don't know what they're seeing. Just like I remember a homeless guy in Hollywood that was screaming out saying, we need to bow down to Zeus. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe he is seeing something. I don't know what's going through his neurotransmitter and how he's dealing with these particular things. But, I wasn't experiencing Zeus. But anyways.
I have a quick question. I'll tell you, no, that's not even quick at all. It's probably incredibly loaded. Okay, so I mean, being conscious by definition is just more being aware of your surroundings, or are we talking about a different kind of, or more like we're intelligent, intelligence?
It's self-awareness.
Yeah, it's self-awareness, and I also like to. This will be my final word because I do have to go. I have to be packing up a lot of stuff because I'm about to drive halfway across the country. But one of the big things is that I don't think that consciousness is necessarily a good word for it, because I mean, if we're going to treat this like a biological trait, let's try to treat it scientifically. And I think it's obvious that consciousness, it's not you have it or you don't. It's a spectrum. Whereas a rock is completely unconscious, where does a lemur fall on that scale? Obviously, it's not a human. It doesn't have the abilities of a human to be self-aware, but it's still not self-aware. Whereas you have something more like a lizard, where it's not, clearly it doesn't have an internal dialogue, but it is able to learn things and react to things. So I think it's a tricky question. It's hard to know. There's so many different ideas out there, and it's almost like the wild, wild west in terms of science. But it doesn't make sense to jettison scientific inquiry and genuine skepticism. If only for the reason that consciousness is kind of spooky.
I do think that one thing that we can recognize about all of our faculties, from eyes to ears to our cognitive abilities, is that it does lend us some adaptive advantage in the environment. And sometimes there's legacy things. The appendix is arguably fading, but actually not. But the point being that what we think is what helps us to survive. And one of the things that we use our cognitive abilities for, far more than making accurate predictions of reality on planet Earth, is we use it as social glue. And I think that we sacrifice our willingness to sacrifice accuracy on the altar of belonging to a social group is obvious when we start looking at the culture on planet Earth. And so I think that what we call consciousness is actually more inclined to produce something that is useful, far more than accurate. in terms of social bonding because it provides an adaptive advantage. That's my guess.
Yeah, and I wanted to, because there was a second part to the question, and this is, I think, where it really is loaded, is where do we first start seeing, because let's go for the earliest cells, and that we're, using sort of senses, I guess, for getting food to some extent, or escaping from predators. Where do we first see that, or we can imply that that actually occurred? Like, when do we know that there was one set of either single-celled or multi-celled organisms that were like, okay, this is a predator, this is a prey, and they first were using their senses to go, okay, I need to get the hell out of here because this is a guy trying to kill me?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, yeah, that is. I mean, especially if you're getting into neuroscience. Only thing I could say on that, if you go back and look at our ancestors, let's just go way back, even Homo habilis and on down, you'll notice in the front cortex of the brain is is a lot more flatter, and if you actually look at the skulls, our brain up front is actually got bigger. Now, why did it change that? Well, there's a lot of speculations on that. It's very possible that the brain going through particular emergency situations, or feeling pain, or realizing there is a scare response, starts building up particular cognitive skills that neurotransmitters start catching on to, and maybe that part of the frontal cortex starts building up more and more. Then on top of that, you got to also look that you get down to some of our other ancestors, and they're starting to use tools. They're starting to develop things, and then the front of the cortex keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now we got to the point of, landing something on the moon. We're understanding physics. I mean, things are getting deeper and deeper. We got computers now, and look at where we're at. And you could just see the frontal cortex of the brain from our old ancestors, and it just massively changed. And what does that mean? Well, to me, I'm just going to kind of throw it out there. I think it's because we developed through our responses and our cognitive skills. That's kind of my point of it. Anybody else?
Okay, and I would have to say the same thing, because it seems like, once we first slowly started to develop our senses from the co-evolving, eyes, ears, and nose and whatnot, that, it seems like eventually we would start to develop something a lot more intelligent. But again, I'm just a layman. So let's move on to the next one. The advantage of sexual reproduction is basically, somebody asked, why would a species go from being asexual to sexual? And my first response was, well, we know that when a species or a population has extra genetic variation that allows for basically better survivability. And that is basically, that's the fundamentals of why they would want to do it. Now, I guess I don't want to go into great detail of like every step-by-step process, but is there anything else to that other than genetic variation allowing for survivability that should be noted for why a species would want sex?
Well, the other thing is that it allows for the arising of allowing you to be able to be picky with your mates, and choosing who you're going to mate with. But it also allows for protection of those mates and stuff like that. It allows for you to essentially have your eggs and your stuff be independent and be watched by these two sexually dimorphic species.
Yeah, I think sexual dimorphism is a real key to the adaptive advantage, but
in particular,
sexual reproduction, because even in human cultures, when you see things that are more aggressive, needing tribal warriors and so forth, you see a lot more in the way of male strength and dominance and so forth. They're sort of like the outer womb of the tribe, and so that does confer a lot of advantages that wouldn't necessarily be there without the sexual reproduction.
Yeah. And plus, introducing that variation, an increase in variation, means that if you have a population which is just a clone, then if something comes along that is able to kill it, it'll just wipe out the whole population, because they're all identical and they're all susceptible. But when you get the mixing of the genetic material from two individuals, this is when you get each new individual is unique.
Okay. So this is the final question that I have. You know, we're going across. We're at 2.5 hours now, and I know not everybody's going to want to watch so many hours of it, but I think we've covered, you know, so many, a lot of the basic stuff. So I'm just going to quote it here for everybody. What they said. This is actually coming from this guy that gave me a link to the top or 50 peer-reviewed papers for creationism. Okay, and so of course my initial thought was, yes, okay, fine. So you have 50 that you quote are for intelligent design or whatever, but we have like 68,000 plus. So by sheer numbers, we have you beat. But it seemed like all of the papers that I could see are, you know, some that maybe challenge very small evolutionary aspects of it, but they're never really pro-creationism. It's more like, you know, anti-evolution. So
Do you want to stick a link to the list of 50, please?
Sure. I think this is actually...
Because I think I went through that list of 50 once. Publication by publication.
This might be it. Let me look at it real quick.
That's the funny thing is that...
I'll find it. You go on with...
Oh, I got it. That's right here. So, while I'll look at that link. I just wanted to...
Oh, no, not that one. Yeah.
I just wanted to tackle the very first one because it was the first one that, you know, it was one that really kind of stood out, and I definitely didn't know how to respond to that. So I'm just going to read it out loud. If you want to read it yourself, it's the very first one on the link. So DNA homology between ape and man has been reported to be 96% when considering only the protein mapping sequences, which represent 2% of the genome. However, the similarity is only about 70 to 75%.
Where are you?
So what?
You said you were doing the first one.
Is that? I thought that was the first one.
Oh yeah, got you here. Right, got you here.
Yeah, okay. It's on the side chat. You posted.
Yeah, I found it cool.
Okay, so you know, so it's 70 to 75% when considering the full genome, including the previously presumed junk DNA, which has now been demonstrated. Yada yada yada. So the real question is, the ape to human species change would require an incredibly rapid rate of mutation, leading to formation of new DNA, thousands of new proteins, and an untold cellular, neural, digestive, and immune-related changes of DNA, which would code for thousands of new functioning proteins. Now, my initial response was, and of course I could be wrong about this because I don't know much, but I thought that during a frame shift mutation, we've seen examples where there was vast changes or almost entire copyings of the DNA and all that stuff. But is that the case? Or, I mean, because if I remember correctly, there's like several million years apart from our recent, you know, human ancestors, from apes to humans, or whatever, or the actual ancestor is. And so, with that many million years, it wouldn't even take that much of a large of a frame shift mutation to actually allow for that to occur. So, well, what say you?
Can I just say this? That I'm trying to find it again. Here we go. Right. That first article, okay, it's published by a surgeon, okay, challenges that it poses, limitations of the chemical origin of life data to explain the origin of DNA. So he's not even considering the possibility that RNA was the first replicator. Right there is showing that he knows nothing about it. Limitation of mutation and natural selection theories to address the irreducible complexity of the cell. That's been dealt with. Limitations of transitional species data to account for the multitude of changes involved in a transition. So he thinks it just jumps from one to the next. And I'm sorry, but
Well, there's a lot of holes you can pick apart there.
Yeah.
Where do you begin?
But the point is that this is a surgeon. The guy's a surgeon. And I'm sorry, but if I want to know about evolutionary biology, I don't ask a surgeon.
Mm.
I ask a surgeon to do surgery on me.
Yeah. And they may know a lot on that. Again, it goes back to what is his real expertise in. So if I was going to ask somebody in that, I'd have to ask, I wouldn't even want somebody to hit me up with that question. Well, I wouldn't mind them hitting it up and knowing parts of it, but I would never consider myself to be an expert. I'd have to why are they not having, again, an expert? Just because this guy's an MD or a doctor does not give him still the credibility, and this is what we come back to.
Exactly. And I'm just going down these. I'll just gloss over the David Abel one just now. I'll come back to that. The Douglas Axe one. That paper, what they did was they used a computer program called Stylus to generate Chinese characters. Right? That's what that was all about doing. So it was one of these probability things. It is a computer model, and a model is only as good as whoever designed that model. Okay? And where was that published again?
And I just want to quickly intervene.
That was published in Biocomplexity, which is the Discovery Institute's own in-house journal. And all the peers who do the reviewing are members of the editorial board of the journal. They don't send it out to external peer review.
Yeah.
It's all done in-house. So that is not what you would call a peer-reviewed journal.
Yeah, because I see this happen a lot because a lot of our top scientists who have found particular things, especially changes, like this one guy who got passed on his because they were finding these insects that were having these mutations or these changes in, in their own chromosomes because they were adapting to pesticides or whatever. I mean, he had to go through a lot extensive, and did he go through the chopping block? Every time he turns it in, he goes through the chopping block. I'm blown away of how many hands are involved in this situation and how long it takes for each one. He's done up to 12, and sometimes some of his papers take up to almost 2 years, and they have to look at the research before they finalize it and say, okay, you have something. And everybody goes, well, why does it have to take so long? Yeah, because it has to be retested. Sometimes they find some possible inconsistency, and they got to find out if there's no inconsistencies there. And this is the whole process. Yeah, it gets a little cumbersome at times, but I'm kind of glad because we really need to hoe down and make sure we don't make mistakes, especially when we're starting to deal with biological issues with our planet, and especially if we're giving doctors antidotes to cure things, and we don't want to give the wrong cure.
No. We seem to have lost Fiona. Hopefully there she is.
Yeah, and if I could just say. Yeah, there she is.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I had a bit of a problem.
Yeah, okay. Just to say this thing, just to mention this thing. Let's take in a note of the chromosome fusion between in terms of our species and that of other apes. Like we have 46 chromosomes. We get 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And like there's like a part of the primate species, I believe. Like in terms of other apes that have 48. Now did that chromosome get lost in like the lineage? No, because that would be lethal. I mean the evidence that it did fuse from the telomeres to the I forgot that last terminology, but in terms of that, you have the evidence of like divergence, but it's still, and this problem of rapid rate of mutation could be just as applied to the biblical story of Genesis. I mean, so two people apparently had enough genetic material in between them to produce 6 to 7 billion human beings.
Oh no, not just that. No. Not just that problem. You end up with about 2,000 years after that, Noah having to redo that equation over again.
2 bottlenecks in one lifetime.
Oh, also, and somehow they're hundreds of thousands of years old. Like
Yeah.
that's amazing. I have a Muslim friend. The reason one of the excuses he gives.
Oh, he went out.
Yeah. One of the things that they do say with the chromosome fusion is, it could never have happened. It's called a
That
Robertsonian.
disease didn't exist back.
Wolf, you're breaking up really bad, man.
Yeah, you were gone, man. Hopefully we'll get you back to finish it up.
Go ahead.
We're going to let Fiona finish saying what she was going to say, and then you can probably try again.
Well, what happened?
You broke up. You were just gone.
Disappeared. Yeah.
Well, I can hear you guys though.
Yeah, but we couldn't hear you. That's it. Let Fiona go now.
It's called the Robertsonian.
I'm good now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. It's called the Robertsonian translocation, and you will hear people saying that it would be very unlikely to happen. However, there is, I think it's in China, there's a chap. He has 44 chromosomes. He's perfectly healthy. There's also an extended family in Finland who have 44 chromosomes, and they're perfectly healthy.
Doesn't a lot of the a lot of it depend on a little bit of inbreeding, like a little bit of to create? Sometimes it was like an odd number of chromosomes. Like it has to, right? Like at a certain point, if we're going to get any kind of speciation, there has to be a sort of bottleneck on the species. Speaking of inbreeding depression, I want to ask about this. Inbreeding depression in general. Is there a minimal number to where you don't experience inbreeding depression in a species? Even like a general number, like 50, 100, 1,000.
Wow. I don't know how to answer that one.
No, I think the human population, the smallest that's ever been, is about 10,000. And that was after, the Toba eruption.
Now, I have seen cases of what inbreeding has done on a larger scale, and it doesn't come out real good. But
isn't the cheetah a perfect example of inbreeding depression?
Yeah, the cheetah's in terrible trouble because the population is down to, was it 70? No, the bottleneck was 70,000 years ago, and it hasn't recovered from it.
So essentially, the idea that a species could go through a bottleneck twice, to being down to either 2 or being the most generous, according to the Bible, 7, inbreeding depression would have been just ridiculous, and there's no way that all of these species could have just carried on. There's no way that they could have.
No, especially not the unclean animals, because you only had a single pair.
Well, there were unclean animals when it revised itself, but the unclean animals are actually specifically specified as for what that meant. And with that, you have that there's a lot of animals that aren't listed, and a lot of animals that are completely missing from that list. Mm-hmm. So you end up with the entire population just being killed off and never recovering. You would have ended up with a whole arrangement of species, not the ones that we currently have now. You'd end up with even if we had like at least 1,000 of each of them, you end up with an extraordinary arrangement of species.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is going to be it, guys. I'm going to go down from the line. I want to start off with Wolf. I just say just your final your closing statements. What you would say to creationists, particularly ones that are on the fence, ones that are wanting, you just go on from there. So Wolf, just a few minutes. You can talk about yourself, who you are, if you have a channel, and then your final message to creationists. Wolf. All right.
Okay, you guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, my overall message to creationists is basically, I guess the only background I can give is this. I recently just well, it was like a week back. So I had a debate with this guy, true free thinker. His name's Mariano Greenback. He's a creationist Christian. Basically, he had he presupposed that the entire biblical story was right, but he left evolution out of it because he didn't like the fact that it was a naturalistic process that explained the biodiversity without a creator. And basically my thought about that is even if this world was designed, the fact of the matter is we're still a species. We are still the result of natural selection and genetic mutation, and we do have empirical evidence for that, like DNA, like transitional forms, like classifications, and they all cross-confirm each other. So I would ask creationists who are really curious about how life developed and how we are, what we are in terms of being a species, a form of life, in terms of and how we're connected to each other biologically, to the Earth chemically, and ultimately to the universe atomically. I would say the most important thing is education, and real education, like actually figuring out the real facts of the real world through the methods of science, reason, and experience. And they could check out my channel for that. Wolf King Atheism. Just type that into YouTube and you could find that. And I'd like to thank Atheist Chef again for having me on. And it was nice talking to all you people. You are all smart, and you all very informative about this stuff. It was really invigorating to have this conversation. So yeah, I hope we could do it again sometime. This has been fun.
All right. Thank you, Wolf. Dan, you are next. Final words? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think bottom line is for a lot of these creationists, first of all, they need to establish how do they came up with the word God in the first place. And then on top of that, how do we know that it's their point of view that stands out even if there is something going on? And how do we know that if there is something going on that it's actually controlling it or even designing it? Because when you look at the science, it doesn't support that. And on top of that, instead of asking such ridiculous questions as they do, and as we see so many of them, I'm just really surprised that they haven't gone out of their way to get into a science lab and find some professionals to just walk through it and take time out, give it at least a couple of years to sit down and see what these results are and how they work out, and cross-reference things and talk to people who know how these things work, instead of asking the same ridiculous questions and wanting us to prove it through words, which you cannot. You have to experience it, just like anything. And this is always a fundamental problem. And I know they want to hold on to these belief systems. Not all of them believe in this big, angry, hateful God in the sky. Some have a much more positive. But the majority I hear who do this, it just seems like I'm just hearing a lot of fear in their voices because they believe in this kind of celestial dictatorship. And so they're more or less making excuses because they need this thing to work, and they need my validation to say, oh, you're absolutely right, to really validate themselves, because it's really not for me. I can tell it's really for themselves, and they don't really see this. So this is a real problem. And on top of that, if they also want to see how some of this process works, then go see Discovering Religion's channel. I highly suggest watching his whole series. It's an excellent series on that. But again, get into the laboratory, do your homework, study it, and then come to a conclusion. And I'm done.
All right.
Thank you. Lastly on that, thank you, Atheist Chef and Fiona, and I'm sorry, what is it, Joe, and also in Bloom, but especially you. I'm glad Wolf is here because I've always enjoyed his videos, and I was really happy to see him. Anyways, I'm sorry. Done.
All right. Perfect. And Le Boom,
Videos too.
give us your thoughts.
Well, one of the things is that people need to start realizing that if you have a being that you subscribe is all-powerful, capable of pretty much anything, his ability would be to be able to do anything however he sees fit, not how you see fit. So you trying to make the universe conducive to your own beliefs is not something that a limitless being that you believe in has to conform to. It could do the evolutionary process and choose that. If you also believe on that everything in the universe is of God's will, then the process in which God chose is His will. The process in which He decided to go about, the naturalistic process, He decided to go about, what have you, is His will and His decision to do so, not the decision of you or however you see fit. The other thing I would recommend is that we can show results. We can find out how things work. We can find out so much about the universe. And if you believe that God created the universe, then finding out how that was done should be fantastic for you. Should be great for you instead of enforcing the world to what you believe it to be. That's lying to yourself, and that's deceptive. And if you believe that God is honest, then He would want you to be honest.
Very well said. Joe, your turn.
Okay, I think the two fundamental propositions that go on here on Earth is that cultural myths that pop up can only be legitimized by refuting evidence, by subjectively distorting the weight of that evidence based on starting with the conclusion and then looking for evidence to support that conclusion. So it never really goes anywhere. It gets bound up in its own thought-stopping cliches. So it ends up blinding us, and I think that's a real problem because no cancer gets cured in the under the blinding umbrella of thought-stopping cliches. In contrast, scientific perspectives start from an empirically testable hypothesis that is then proven or disproven based on evidence. And to me, that seems like a better tool to navigate. Now, I know there are some really good science communicators out there. If anybody's really interested, the hot topic today was really abiogenesis and evolution in general. But if people are interested in finding out about abiogenesis from a good science communicator, a guy by the name of, and you can look him up, Google him, Dr. Robert M. Hazen. His last name is spelled H-A-Z-E-N. He's an excellent science communicator and goes through all of the different topics on how the earth sciences produced us in a natural way. So ultimately, reality is the higher power. We're here. We're now. This is where we are. So that's all I have to say.
All right. And okay, that was loud.
Once I get a sound effect, apparently.
And Fiona, for you, and I want to stress, I'm curious if you could give us a not just a scientific perspective, but a theological one, a Christian one. What you would say to your fellow believers that are creationists, and about that you can be a Christian and believe in science or trust science, etc.
What I would say is that the Bible isn't a science book. It was never written as a science book. The writers never intended it to be used as a science book. It was never intended to explain the natural world. It's intended to explain to us the spiritual relationship that we have with God. It reflects the understanding that the writers had at the time of the natural world. Now, if you want to then get your science from the Bible, then you're getting your science from a Bronze Age civilization that was wandering around herding goats in a desert. Now, that's not to say they were stupid or anything, but their understanding was lacking, shall we say, in comparison to the understanding that we have of the natural world. Now, if I want to know how God went about creating this planet, now bear in mind, I'm of the opinion that God's place is at the Big Bang, that he basically put the basic laws of physics in place, he lit the blue touch paper, and he stood well back. Okay? But if you want to gain an understanding of how we've ended up where we are, in the natural world, then what you need to do is read the language, the words that God has left written in the rocks and in the organisms and in the cosmos itself. And that's where you find out how it was all put together. And to ignore that, to not use the brain that you have. And if you are a creationist, you believe that God actually gave you that brain as it is. To not use that brain for these awe-inspiring discoveries that we've had, to throw them out because it doesn't fit in with the nomadic goat herders, then you're denying the gift that God gave you, as in your brain. And what I would say is, if you want to take issue with evolution because you're a creationist, first learn what evolution actually is, and then find out the difference between evolution and the theory of evolution. There's no point in attacking a straw man version of evolution, because all that happens is that you set fire to the straw man and evolution is still standing. It's a waste of energy, it's a waste of time. There is no point in tackling and denying a subject that you don't even know what the subject is. If you don't understand it, if it seems really stupid to you, then maybe you have a misunderstanding there. Go and find out what it is, and then pull it apart. Understanding a subject is easy. Ripping it apart requires great depth of knowledge on the subject. You can't rip it apart from a position of ignorance on what it actually is. And I'd like to thank everybody for being here. It's been a really good discussion. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Glad. Thank you. Yes, and I mimic those words. I appreciate everybody showing up. Wolfs, Suzuki, Das, Boom, Joe, Fiona, especially you, being the resident theist of the group, or at least Christian for sure. We appreciate everybody's input, and I just want to put in my last little bit. Being that I was a former Christian and I used to be a fundamentalist, and then I slowly became more liberal as time go along because I learned to not think that government. Actually, it's funny. I didn't think that dinosaur bones were hidden by the devil. I had for a while conceived it was possibly a conspiracy among scientists to plant bones and whatnot. There was no proof for that. And then I got smarter. So. But then, I thought about how, especially the creation story, and how, according to the Jewish people that wrote this, that they knew it's themselves that this was a very shallow representation of what the actual creation of the earth is. Mm-hmm. They didn't literally believe it was 6 days or 7 days. This was just them being incredibly poetic to tell their story. And so when I first thought about that, it really made sense to me. This again back when I was a believer, that and it's similar to how Wolf King described it, was that to put God just to the point of where he just poofed and animals appeared completely limits the incredible power that God is supposed to have, and the design, the complete intricacy, and it just cheapens what God could specifically do. If you just say he just abracadabra and things appeared and all that stuff, it ruins the beauty of the entire experience, or at least the claim rather. So that's all I'm going to say on that. So again, thank you guys for showing up. Thank you guys for putting up with it for 3 hours of a whole bunch of sciencey things and whatnot. So that is it. This is the Atheist Chef and everybody else signing off.
Cheerio.